years, I have to admit, I was not the greatest teacher. I struggled like all beginning teachers did. And halfway through my third year, I was observed by a fellow teacher who was very highly regarded, and she said this to me. She said, just embrace the chaos. And it was her way of saying, use the students' energy with your teaching. And after that, things started to click for me, very, very much so. In year 4 and year 5, I was doing phenomenal. I was still teaching middle school Spanish. Middle school is not the easiest thing to do, okay? But 30% of teachers now quit after year 5. They're done. And I did the same thing. But for me, I had a glaring hole in my life while I was teaching those first 5 years. And on March 12th, 2017, I accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. Praise the Lord. I was a homeschool kid growing up. I did go to church. My parents used to go down to the clinic. But I was very rebellious. And it wasn't until this day that the Lord called me to Him. Praise the Lord again. When that happened, very shortly after, I said, what am I using my talents for? And I applied to the Wauwatosa School District. It's in northwest Milwaukee County. And I applied to be a Spanish teacher at a middle school, one of 13 applicants, and I got hired. And I could immediately sense that the Lord was with me during my time there. Also, my main principal was a 25-year vet principal. No-nonsense kind of guy, the kind of guy you want to work for. My vice principal was 35, married with kids, strong Christian man. I mean, these are exactly the same kind of guy you want to work for. Well, year 2 rolled around, and I had already become members of multiple teams. I wrote curriculum. I still use some of this curriculum to this day. I did the sports clubs. I was a member of a technology and education group. I was a new teacher mentor, so if you were a new teacher at our building, I would go observe you teach and give you pointers. I also ran professional development days because I was known at my school for implementing activities where students got up and moved around the classroom. And actually, to be honest, the only reason that I was known for that is because I had this crazy idea that a 6th grade boy didn't have ADHD. He just didn't want to sit at a desk for 50 minutes straight. But something changed in year 2. My principal, the main one, retired. The vice principal, who should have taken over, he left. And I got a brand new principal. And he was lobbied by teachers within our building to start a GSA club. For those of you who are unaware, back then it was Gay Straight Alliance. Now it's called Gender and Sexuality Alliance. I think it's because gay straight wasn't inclusive enough. I saw things around the school that were just kind of bizarre. I was doing well, so I just let it be. And in 7th grade, they do a project, and this is towards the end of my year. They do a project, it's called the I Am Wall. The teachers would put I Am in huge letters on the wall, and they would give the students little pieces of paper, and they would write things that they are. I am a Christian. I am a baller. I am optimistic. I'm not very optimistic about your spelling. But the one that got me was this one at the bottom, and it's blue. It says, I am a raging pansexual. I'll be honest, I didn't even know what that was. I don't even know what Google thought I was after I Googled it. And I went immediately to my principal. And I said, these are 7th graders, they're 12 and 13-year-olds. I don't think we should be allowing them to broadcast who they will and won't have sex with. And he told me, he goes, well, let me talk to HR, and I'll get back to you. He called me into his office the very next day. He said, we want the students to express themselves, so we're going to allow it. I kind of knew at that point, my time there was going to be limited. The school ended the first part of let me talk about this first. Why is this happening in schools? And I'm sure the other speakers will talk about this as well, but 9% of all teachers in the United States identify as LGBTQ right now. That's from Zippia.com, that's a career website. My non-Common Core math skills tell me that's 342,000. Not only that, but the university systems, and I'm going to use the term, the hot term right now, the university systems groom teachers, and then the teachers groom students. How do I know this? Because many teachers, Wisconsin, Michigan, Texas, Tennessee, doesn't matter where you are, you have to take multicultural education, where you're taught these things. This is a slide out of Wisconsin for a freshman student to become a teacher. These are gender-neutral terms to address a group. Hey there, change makers. How are you doing, morning glories? What's up, peepadoodles? I'm just being honest with you. If I walked in a room and a guy said, hey, how are all you peepadoodles doing? I would just walk out the back. No, I'm done. My actually favorite one is the Tiger King one. Hey, cool cats and kittens. The person who gave me this slide actually said that the professor for them says to them to start class every time, how are you doing, ladies and gentlemen? The university school, or the universities groom the teachers groom the students. 2019 came around, and the first part of the year was fine, and then what happened? COVID. And everyone was homeschooled, okay? I actually praise the Lord for COVID.
Yes.
Because it opened parents' eyes to what was being taught in public schools. It was during this time that I learned a 6th grade student of mine, biological female, might be identifying as a male. It was during that time. Now, for me, what happened next in taking a stand, my goal for you in this is just to be strengthened, right, by this, to encourage you to take a stand. Now, as I progress in my Christian walk, the more and more I read the Bible, I'm just amazed by it, right? You have the Psalms, you have these beautiful hymns, praises, prayers, you have the Proverbs, things to live your life by, Jesus' parables. You have, hey, if you're a guy and you like military history, you should probably read the Bible. But to me, sometimes, God is just quite literal. And I don't think I would have been able to take the stand I did unless I just took this literally. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. It's actually a blessing. That's on the sign outside. So, a day before school started, in 2020, 2021, one day before, I got an email from the school guidance counselor saying, you have a biological girl who is now a male. You have to call her by male pronouns, a male name, and she's going to use the single stall with the key for the bathroom. On a side note, isn't it kind of weird when the girl identifies as a guy, she uses a single stall with the key, but when the guy identifies as a girl, he uses the girl's bathroom? It's really weird how that works. The whole first week, because of the timing, I taught the student without referring to her by any name or any pronoun. I was a Spanish teacher. Imposible. Not possible. God was put into my heart. What do I do, Lord? And for that week, I was on my knees in prayer a lot. And on Saturday, I decided, you know what? I need to email my principal office. I just want to read you some excerpts about what I wrote to him. I've changed the name, by the way, of the student. I cannot in good conscience, because of my personal and religious beliefs, refer to a biological 12-year-old female as a male. I will treat Rhiannon with the same dignity and respect that I show all of my students. All I'm asking is not to be required to say something contrary to my deeply held beliefs. I believe that we can respectfully disagree about important topics, but still treat each other with dignity and respect. And in a typical class, I would refer to Rhiannon by last name and avoid pronouns. This would normally allow me to avoid any issues. However, as you are aware in teaching Spanish, my principal was a former Spanish teacher. It's virtually impossible to avoid the use of gendered language, and I'm asking for the school to provide me an accommodation for my religious beliefs and transfer Rhiannon to another teacher's class. There was a class going on of the exact same level at the exact same time, and the teacher was agreeable to having her in class. That was my request. So, what happened next? My principal emailed me on a Sunday. That's when you know something's going down, when a public school administrator emails you on Sunday. On Monday, he called me into his office, just wanted to understand my position again. On Tuesday, he called me back into his office. Monday night, he had done some research. And these were his exact words to me on Tuesday. Do you know what happens to teachers who don't call students by their preferred pronouns? And I said, yeah, that's why I emailed you. On Thursday, the director of equity for our district showed up at our building and had a meeting with myself and the principal. Just a side note, if your school district has a director of equity, that's all you need to know about your local school district. We actually had equity coaches at every building. It's kind of funny. He was a young guy, like me. He came into my room one time and said, you know, your job title is equity coach. You know, yo soy maestro de español, ¿saben? And then, you know, Spanish teacher, like, how would you define equity? It's funny, he looked at me and goes, that's a really good question. What? That's your job title. The director of equity, I'm sure some of you have been in this position before. You're in a close quarters with someone. This person just doesn't dislike you. They hate you to your soul. We left. My principal actually interrupted one of my next classes and said, keep your phone on you. HR is going to call you. School ended at 3:30. The head of HR called me at 3:31. And they told me, you are immediately being placed on administrative leave. And I said, okay, well, why? So we can investigate you. Those were her exact words. Me being me, I was like, what did I do? I came to you with this situation. So for 2 weeks, I was on paid administrative leave. During that time, I had a meeting with the head of HR and her legal counsel. And I will say this, I've never been on my knees in prayer that much. I was in my Bible countless times a day. And it was just God's way of telling me, this cup, you have to drink this. And you're going to take a stand. And under no circumstances will you call that girl a boy. And you're probably going to lose your job over it. As hard as that was, my wife was 7 months pregnant at the time. She was about to kill me. I don't blame her. As hard as it was, I wouldn't take it back. I'm going to read you quickly what they wrote me after those 2 weeks. Hi James, this is a letter to our follow-up conversation on September 25th, 2020. You requested that the district transfer a transgender student out of your class as an accommodation for your religious beliefs. The district directed you to use the preferred name and pronouns of the student consistent with the board administrative guideline. Students who are transgender and students non-conforming to gender stereotype roles. I didn't even break a board policy, it was a guideline. You refused to commit to this directive. You informed the district that using the student's preferred name and pronouns would conflict with your religious belief that people are male or female. You stated that as a Christian, you could not in good conscience refer to the student using preferred male name or pronouns, or any pronouns. They engaged in the interactive process, considered your request, and then determined your requested accommodation is not reasonable and would create undue burden. That's the legal term, undue burden. In short terms, we are not going to transfer that student to the exact same class at the exact same time. From there, they gave me 4 options, okay? Option 1, you can just resign. I can't tell you how many times the head of HR said the word resign. They wanted me to so badly because it nullifies any sort of legal obligation on their part. The second one, I could be fired, and I'll talk about that in a second. The third one was comply. We kind of knew where that was going. I wasn't going to do it. The fourth one was teach at a jail. The Wauwatosa School District runs the Milwaukee County Juvenile Justice Center. It's the jail for students who are 12 to 17 years old who are either awaiting felony charges or are felons. Weighing my options, seeing as my wife was 7 months pregnant, the district knew that too. I said, all right, send me to jail. I'll say this, you know who's great to talk about Jesus? Yeah. People who know they're sinners. Yeah. You want to know who know they're sinners? People in jail. Yeah. It's funny, because I actually didn't teach Spanish there. I taught civics. And we actually had some convicted felons pass the U.S. history test to graduate high school. Nice. I actually didn't mind it. The district then put me up for non-renewal in May of 2021. Now I want to talk briefly about why I immediately didn't go to being fired. I had read a story about a man, his name is Peter Blaney. He was a French teacher in Virginia who said, I will call the girl by a male name, but I won't call her by male pronouns. Something happened in class. I can't get a great picture from reading the stories of this. And something happened, and he said, help her. And because he said her, he got fired. The lawyers that I was talking to who were good said, well, we might already have a case like this, so we're not going to take yours. Or we're not employment lawyers, so we're not going to take it. But we'll refer you to some employment lawyers. The employment lawyers were really tripped up by one fact about my case that's different. They continually asked me, why won't you call the girl by a male name? And I said, because if you call her by a male name, you're just affirming her gender. My name's James, right? I typically go by Jim. Doesn't change my gender. We had a 6th grade boy in one of my classes, little guy, just went like this the whole time. We called him Boogie. Didn't change his gender. So I told the employment lawyers, I said, no, I will not. My non-renewal came in front of the board. They first tried to put it on the consent agenda. If you ever want to know where school boards are hiding things, look at the consent agenda. Because usually it's, do I have a motion to pass? Aye. All those in favor is aye. But I appealed it, and in a closed-door meeting, the school board was there with their legal counsel. The district administrative staff was there with their legal counsel. And I was there with my dad, who is a technician. He is not a lawyer, but he was there for emotional support. The school district then presented, the school administrative staff said that the only reason Mr. Krause is being non-renewed is because enrollment is down at the jail, and we no longer need a Spanish teacher. I countered with 2 things. I read them that letter, I read you, and I said, I never taught Spanish. I was a civics teacher. If you ever want to see a school board member's head explode, tell them that their civics teacher is a white, straight Christian male. It was actually hilarious. They ushered us out, and they debated for about an hour, and they came back, and it was a unanimous 7-0 decision to non-renew my contract. It was a close call, I know. From there, I had a job lined up working in a warehouse. I have nothing against working in a warehouse, but it just wasn't me. And I left, said, under no circumstances am I going back into education. I'm not risking it again. I'm not putting my family through that again. I took my stand, that's it. The same year that I left, the superintendent of the school retired under allegations that he was giving contracts to companies without getting any other bids. It's a huge no-no in the public school system. His assistant superintendent actually was the person giving bids to her husband's company. The new superintendent came in, and the school board president resigned. The director of equity, who hated my guts, he got fired by the new superintendent. The head of HR, who was probably the worst in this process, she also got fired, and 1 year later, my principal also got fired. I have no explanation for you other than vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Now, just to be clear, this new superintendent is even more wicked than the other ones. Because the Wauwatosa School District, a year after I left, the U.S. Department of Education sent out their new Human Growth and Development curriculum, which then went to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, which then went to Wauwatosa School District, and they were the first district in the state to implement new Human Growth and Development. It's evil. It's the best word to describe it, I think. A parent had somehow found out what happened to me in this year. Got a hold of me, said, "You were pretty good at writing curriculum and lesson planning. Would you be interested in speaking to a friend of mine who's fairly well connected to speak out against this?" And I said, "Absolutely." And with my new friend's help, I wrote a letter that got published in Wisconsin saying, "I will not embrace the chaos of what's going on at that school." Unfortunately, they voted it in anyway. From there, I was still working at the warehouse, and I was invited to hear my old college professor speak. At UW-Oshkosh, he was my Shakespeare professor, and he was speaking on critical race theory. I kind of knew what he was up to, but not a ton. So I went there, and I got there a little bit early, and I walked up to him and said, "Hey, Dr. Pesta, I don't know if you'll remember me. I'm Jim Krause. I was in your Shakespeare class probably 12 years ago." And he looked at me and he goes, "You were that homeschool kid, weren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was. What have you been up to?" "Well, I was a public school teacher and some stuff happened. Here's my card. Email me what happened." I emailed him. He responded back. He said, "That's ridiculous. And actually, I am the executive director for Freedom Project Academy, an all-online Judeo-Christian school, classical education, zero Common Core. Because of all of the parents seeing what was happening to their schools, children's schools during COVID, we've had a huge influx of students, and we're looking for another academic advisor. Would you be interested in applying?" And praise the Lord, I work for Freedom Project Academy now as an academic advisor. Woo. I cannot tell you other than God's hand in the situation. From being put on paid administrative leave, to having people just screaming at you, to having a person hating your guts, to working in a warehouse, to having to walk through 3 huge cell doors just to teach people. It was all worth it. I want to leave with you now a verse and a passage that just helped me through this time. Again, my goal for you here is to be encouraged, to be strengthened, to just take a stand. In all honesty, I'm just a pretty regular dude. Like, if you catch me outside of here, I'm probably wearing jogging pants, a t-shirt, and eating a Culver's cheeseburger. For real. The verse that helped me through, a passage that tremendously helped me through this time, was Romans 5, 1-5. I'd just like to read it for you now. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Amen. Again, I'm just here to strengthen you, to encourage you to take a stand. It doesn't have to be something crazy. Again, my name is Jim Krause. Here's some QR codes if you want to check out Freedom Project Academy or my contact information. Again, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much, Jim. Let's hear it again for Jim. So, what I love is we all have stories. And these stories are going to help so many people. And it's so important in these days because there's just so much madness going on, as you know. So thank you so much, Jim. So our next speaker, she is a wonderful friend of mine. She is a parent advocate. She has a business at Student Advocacy Michigan, and she is a special ed advocate. And she has been tirelessly working for years to try to help parents and their students in the education system, because there's so much stuff that goes on. If you're familiar with any of the stuff that's going on currently in the education system, and she will also be talking about how she helps with the special ed aspect of things. So please welcome Maria Giancotti.
And I'm also very concerned about the school to prison pipeline dealing with disabled children that have emotional challenges. So I liked hearing about that. But anyway, today I really wanted to speak with you guys a little bit about social emotional learning and also social emotional needs of children in school. As a special education advocate, some people don't know what that is. So what does that do exactly? I basically help parents with disabled children get the appropriate supports and accommodations and services they need in school. So I'm a non-attorney advocate. I studied special education law, and I use the law a lot in what I do, but it's really to help with finding the right programs for children. That often involves some of the social and emotional needs they have relative to their disabilities. So I deal with this level on an individual level, but most of all, as well as a parent, I've got with it just seeing what's going on in schools. I kind of was not somebody who was engaged a lot and kept hearing rumblings and things like, oh, there's CRT in the schools and this and that. And I was like, that's not happening in my kid's school, And then, I don't know, one day I just kind of got curious. So I went on the school's website, did some looking around, and found some things that I really was surprised to see. And then it opened up a can of worms, and I went down about 50 rabbit holes, and here I am a few years later talking about what I found. I think the biggest thing I can say is that for parents, we have to decide what's right for our children and our families, but it's difficult to make that decision when we don't know what's going on. So I think the biggest thing I can say is to encourage people to ask questions, to be aware. So the more you know what's happening in your school, the more you can determine if that's right for your child or not, and you can make your own personal decisions about that. Obviously, everybody has different beliefs, and we need to honor as much as we can those beliefs, but at the same time, if you're not aware, then you don't even know what you're dealing with. So I'm going to give you some awareness today. So we're looking a little bit first into critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social emotional learning, and for culturally responsive teaching. So it kind of is making an involvement. When you hear CRT, you think critical race theory, and you go to the school and say, I've heard you're teaching that, and they say, we don't do that. They kind of call it a bunch of different names. So you kind of have to be aware of how it's evolving and what other names or descriptions are being used. So critical race theory, and these slides are made available on the website because there's a lot of information here. So you take pictures of what you want, but they will be made available on the website. But basically, the critical race theory talks about civil rights and activists looking at the intersection of race, society, and law in the U.S. It discusses a lot about racial bias in laws and institutions, and using, essentially, it kind of also comes into the political realm. CRT was first introduced more in law school, but it's kind of made its way and transformed, and now we've got different versions of it all the way down in our schools for our kids. So some of the main components of CRT is racism is ordinary and it exists all the time. It's the social construction of race, the idea that interest converges, and storytelling and counter-storytelling, and also really looking at the notion that whites have actually been the recipients of civil rights legislation. So people will say, well, how can it be harmful? Like, what exactly is it going to do to our children? Well, it does have some effect because the way it's presented often divides children into two different groups, the oppressed and the oppressor. Sometimes they're having kids identify which one are you. And I found that interesting because, again, when I was going down these rabbit holes, one of the first things I found on my son's school district website was a particular program they're using for their social emotional learning, which was called Justice for Learning. And when I went on the website for Justice for Learning, or it was Learning for Justice, when I went on their website, they had lesson plans. So I pulled the lesson plans, and the lesson plans were, who's the oppressor in the story? Who's the oppressed in the story? It was like everything on there was like all about oppressed and oppressor, and I thought, how is this CRT in my kid's school if that's what this is? I didn't think this was happening. So again, one of the things it focuses on is dividing, and really not focusing on something that's important, I think, to a lot of people is just really assessing somebody on the quality of their character and who they are as a person. That's something I've always taught my son. When he says to me, Mom, I'm in class with a trans kid and I had to do a project with him, my first question was, well, were they a nice person? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. I said, then I'm glad you did the project, everything went well? He's like, yeah. To me, it should be about him being trans, him or her being trans. It should be about, are you a nice person? So, let's just consider some of the things that we think are important in evaluating who somebody is. DEI is your diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, as we mentioned, many schools have DEI directors. That's something you should check out. I know our school had one, and still does, and has done equity audits. And we're in a very progressive state in our school district. We did equity audits like 4 years ago, and some schools are just doing them now. So our school's very progressive in that way. But basically, the DEI piece also is making its way down into public schools. And again, it started more in the corporate world, and then it's kind of got into administration, and now it's kind of coming down all the way to the level in the classroom. And some of the ways it's used is the equity audits, DEI administrative positions, school committees for DEI. So you'll see those are some of the common ways you might find it in your school.
Can you go back one second? Let me just look at that. Or a picture. Oh, sorry.
How do I get back here? There we go. All right. So when we talk about equity and equality, they are similar, and they sound similar, but they're not really words that can be used completely interchangeable because they kind of have different meanings. And I always think that this picture really presents kind of an overview of what that is. At the end of the day, you know, when I think about why equity could be a problem, it's, at the end of the day, I think every child should have the potential to develop and grow and achieve what they can for themselves. Some kids do need more help. I work with a marginalized community of children that are disabled. They need more help. They need more support. But at the end of the day, we've got to push kids to achieve everything they can and give them the support they need. But let's say you have a child who's extremely bright. Should that child not excel to a level that he can achieve because other children are at a lower level and can't achieve or are not on the same level as that child? So if that person could go on with more training and education to become a scientist to discover something really amazing that changes the world, but if we're never affording that kid who's really smart or really excelled that opportunity, we might miss out on some great things in life. But at the same time, we still have to be considerate of the kids that are at a different level. And that's something that obviously that's important to me. But how do we find that happy medium? Equity and equality are not the same thing. So we talked a little bit about that. The word equity also does come a little bit more from a Marxist ideology and really focusing on everybody having comparable outcomes. Everyone has the same worth. They have to be treated, treatment they need in order to be the best selves, which is a good thing, I guess, but treating people unequally to ensure that the outcomes are equalized. I don't know, at the end of all this, do we want everybody to just be at the same place? I think we need to have everybody achieve to their maximum from where they start. So when we look at social emotional learning, these are some of the components. Social emotional learning has the emotional intelligence, and that was the founder of CASEL. Is anybody familiar with the CASEL program? Okay. All right. Well, the founder of CASEL, and we'll talk about CASEL, you'll understand a little bit more about that, is one of the people that kind of coined that phrase. And basically, social emotional learning was created and implemented without evidence-based data. So it was kind of like a theory and a thought. It wasn't something that was a tangible data that says, this is what it is, this is what we need. The focus is to make children more agreeable. So in my mind, it's more of teaching them to understand what you want them to understand, but not really be thinkers and be able to think for themselves. So culturally responsive teaching is really focused on the cultural competence, and it's more or less the new CRT. So you might not call it critical race theory anymore, but culturally responsible, culturally competent. Focuses on the whole child, and they do focus on infiltrating it into every aspect of the school day. It's embedded in the culture, it's embedded in the curriculum. So, for example, my child was taking sign language class at his school for a foreign language, or they had to take a second language. He was asked to learn how to sign 9 different genders. I don't know how that came into the curriculum of that. It was not a sex ed class where they were talking about sexually related things, but it's infiltrating even into a sign language class where you're being told that these are things that you need to do. So, everyone says, well, why are we doing this? Well, there's a whole bunch of people that want this to happen. Global organizations, national, the education organizations, teachers unions. So there's a lot of push for this. And when we look at some of the organizations, some of the big ones, UNESCO, World Health Organization, World Economic Forum, CDC, UNICEF, Catholic and religious schools, also the Department of Education. So with the whole push for social emotional learning, it is kind of a process, and it takes several years for them to get the child where they want them to be. So they have a plan. It's not just let's just talk about it and do a little bit. There is a plan for this. And so they really want to shift the lens of an entire generation and to work towards employability in an equitable world. That is one of the goals of this. Teaching children what to think and not how to think. They start in elementary school. They really try to increase self-awareness and try to have kids identify where they're at in this realm of social emotional world and CRT. In middle school, they push it to another level. And then when they get to high school, they really drive these kids into action and trying to get them to be warriors for justice in these areas. So it is a well thought out plan. It's not just let's throw a little bit of social emotional stuff in there and see what happens. There's an end goal. So the endless cycle of social emotional learning, and this is always interesting because again, there's a very well thought out plan, and not only is the plan to transform the kids, but there's a lot of money made in this too. And there's a lot of organizations working together to keep it flowing and keep everyone rich. So they do data collection through surveys and kind of figure out where the kids are at, the starting point. Then we interpret the data, we go into actionable results, and basically implement an action plan to move it along further in the process. So the process keeps going. They're constantly reevaluating, adding more, reevaluating, adding more. And they use all these different programs, and some of these programs are making tons of money. And it is all to move this all along with the 12-year plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about data collection because this is one of the key components of social emotional learning. And I think when I went into this, I kind of got really surprised at the end of the day to know that they have like some such social profile on my child out there. I had no idea this was happening, which as a parent seems a little violating to me. I don't want everybody knowing everything about my child. But essentially, there's a couple different places in which they collect data and what they do with this data. There's the state longitudinal data systems, and basically every state has one, and they connect two or more of the 4 agencies. The 4 agencies would be early learning data, K through 12 data, post-secondary education data, and then the last one is labor and employment data. So they connect these databases together. And then what they do is they, with the goal of evaluating the next generation for employability, for work skills in an equitable world. That's what their goal is. So they're looking at that as an outcome. When they look at this data, they start developing profiles of children and determine, oh, is he following the SEL stuff? He's not going to be very employable unless he does that. But they kind of start looking at these things, and it kind of falls into some of these other things like the ESG scores and all of that. So it's a much bigger picture than just education. This is the child's whole future, a person, an adult's future. So then they get the data through school surveys, and parents have a choice to opt out of these surveys. They're not mandatory. But a lot of times we don't know these surveys are going on or what's on them. So that's where you as a parent have to be really diligent. You have to read those emails that come out. And I'm a busy mom. So I have a group chat with a bunch of moms, and so when one of the surveys comes out, somebody's always posting it. One of us always misses it, right? So I say connect with other parents, know what's going on, because you might miss an email. We're all busy with our lives, right? But you have the opportunity to opt out of these surveys, and you just need to put it in writing to the school and let them know my child's not going to take that survey. I don't want them to do that. They also gather data on academics and, like I said, social emotional understanding, and they were learning in that. They developed this psychoanalysis of your child, and they had the whole profile. So when we talk about data collection, we really can't not talk about Panorama. Is anybody familiar with Panorama? Okay, she's nodding. Okay, so Panorama makes a whole lot of money off of social emotional learning, and basically they really perpetuate that cycle. So one of the things that they say is they have efforts to create an environment that embeds social emotional learning into basically every part of the experience at school, and to promote equitable outcomes for every learner. So it's pretty important. That's something that's literally right on their website. They collect data on teachers and students. They have partnerships with a lot of major organizations. They're funded by the Jan Zuckerberg Initiative. They partner with CASEL. We're going to talk about CASEL in a minute. They collect data through surveys. They create psychological profiles, measure the implementation of social emotional initiatives and programs, analyze all the data collected through the lens of equity. So that's what they're looking at through the whole process. And they return the data with updated actionable plans, and then they start the process all over again. The school buys more SEL, and we pay for it as taxpayers. We're paying for this. So, as I mentioned before, surveys are an option. You can opt out. I also recommend that you take a look at the website, schoolsinitiative.org. They have opt-out forms for you, so if you don't want to participate in surveys or something like that stuff, they have some great resources. Some of the surveys are mandated by the state sometimes, but the reason why the schools do these surveys is not only the SEL, but they get grants to do them, and they have to provide his data. So they get a whole lot of money from the schools to do these surveys and to collect information on our children. So that's sometimes another reason why these surveys are being implemented and initiated. The school does want funding for it. So this is the one that's interesting, the MyFi survey. Is anybody familiar with MyFi surveys? Okay, so this one is done in the state of Michigan, and it's the Michigan Profile for Healthy Youth. And it's done for 7th, 9th, and 11th grades. So there's some statistics on it. But the survey itself does go into a lot of sexual behaviors and emotional health of children. And some of the questions on the surveys are really quite graphic. And some of the topics are quite, I guess not what I would expect as a parent to see my 7th grader being questioned on in school, right? So, some of the questions on the slide are hard to see here. But some of the questions are about sex even, and they even ask, like, if you've had sex with a partner, how old were you? Was the partner 5 years younger than you or within 5 years older than you? And I'm thinking to myself, if they're asking my 7th graders to have sex with somebody, but then again, is the person 5 years younger or 5 years older? I'm like, what? Why are you asking this of a, this 12-year-old? So there's some very graphic questions, but when you look at the MyFi survey, it is on their website that you can opt out. So it's one you have to look for, especially when your kids are in those grades. Now, the schools are required to tell you that there's going to be a survey, and if you as a parent want to review the survey ahead of time, you should have the ability to do so. So it's not like all the surveys are going to be unbeknownst to you, but you have to pay attention. You know they're coming. This was a survey that was done in Birmingham Public Schools in the 21-22 school year. The questions that were on the survey were all of these different options, asking about depression, anxiety, their personal decisions, relationships with parents at home. When they had the question about gender ID, they gave the kids 9 different choices. When the sexual orientation questions were on there, they had 10 different choices to choose from. They talked about drug use and drinking and all of that. So this was not even a MyFi survey. This was just a survey the school did. My son is in Birmingham schools. I opted my son out of the survey because I knew it was coming, and they gave it to him anyway. My son knew because I kept asking him, did you get that survey? He said when they gave it to him, they said, I'm not taking it. So thank God he listened. Teenagers don't usually listen. So, but they did give it to him anyway, so there was no communication to the teacher to not provide this survey to my son. Okay, so parents do have rights. You need to know about, in terms of the surveys, they should be notifying you ahead of time. You should have a right to review the survey. You can opt out of the surveys. I think the big thing is just from my lesson, is you really have to communicate with your kids. I mean, my son knew, I was asking him, the survey's going on, did they give it to you? Whatever, and he knew enough to not take the survey and exercise his right because we had that conversation. So you really do have to ask questions, and you really have to follow up with your kids and follow up with the school. So think because you opt out of one survey doesn't mean they're going to A, do it, and B, it doesn't mean they're going to opt you out of all surveys. So you have to kind of be very diligent with the process if that's something that you don't want your kids to participate in. Now, I did mention CASEL earlier. And CASEL is one of the largest providers of social emotional learning that is used in the schools, and it is used in a lot of schools. And it is partnered with many, many very large organizations. So, CASEL, basically one of the key things that they say is the practice of social emotional learning emphasizes social and emotional skills to the same degree as other subjects like math, science, and reading. They're focusing just as much on that as your child learning math or reading, which is crazy to me given the state performance for literacy and other things in our state. I don't know. I mean, I'm a numbers person. I used to be a sales analyst years ago. So when I looked at Detroit Public Schools, I saw that 8% of kids, I think it's something like 8%, it's a very low number, of children in Detroit Public Schools at age 3rd or 4th grade are able to read proficiently. But yet we're spending time on all of this. It just blew my mind. I'd like to see all of our kids read. That's a foundation. We need future for these kids. But there's the 5 major components they focus on. And quite honestly, when I see the components, I think they kind of look like good things. Like, I want my kid to be able to be self-aware and have relationship skills. They don't sound bad. It's just the way we do it. I think in general, when you see that, you say, I agree with those things. That's all right. But how are they getting there? How are they doing it? And what are they teaching them about their views on those individual key concepts? Well, here are some of the partners that CASEL works with. There's a lot of big ones, and it was funny when I went down these rabbit holes of this, I really didn't know a lot of these organizations, and I was like, so what are their views? What do they think about? Well, I found out there's some key things. Bill and Melinda have some good stuff. More diverse, equitable, and inclusive, racism, sexism, and other forms of bias show up in every corner and every aspect of our global society. Only through greater DEI can we achieve this. We cannot achieve our goals without embedding DEI as a fundamental principle. We need to transform schools. Right from their website. Chan Zuckerberg also has a few choice ones: dismantling systemic racism and inequality, the justice and opportunity partners to help accelerate the pace of progress towards an equitable future. The K-12 education system must be transformed. Well, I would agree with that, but my idea of transformation is very different than theirs. I'd like to see really great scores in literacy. I'd like to see special education laws be followed. I've got a bunch of things, but they aren't really these topics. Here's a couple others. Equity to promote fairness, justice, and transparency. Inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility in the use of AI and data. Everything is more equitable. Disrupt systems of oppression. Systemic change in education. There's a lot of comments on these sites, and I was not familiar with some of these organizations at all. This organization here, the NOVO Foundation, directs millions each year to leftist center groups advocating for abortion, LGBT interests, and liberal economics. Provides funding for LGBT interests, pro-abortion, Black Lives Matter and immigration, Black Lives Matter for Electoral Justice Project. So there's some very interesting things on their website, so you can kind of get a feel for what these partners are about. Okay, so this was going down so many rabbit holes. This is a scary diagram. So essentially, when I was kind of looking at the social emotional learning, I kind of wanted to see who's all involved in it. Like, I know that there's these organizations, but who else? But I started going to the websites of various organizations and seeing what they had to say. And there's a whole bunch. So there's all the global organizations that I mentioned up in the top left. Then when you look at the education system, you've got everything from the U.S. Department of Education, the teachers' unions, the National Association for Secondary School Principals, the superintendent organizations. They're all on board with this. It is all over their websites. It is all over their trainings. And you can find this by going to their websites, because that's essentially what I did. I know I'm a little crazy, but I was curious. The state has, our governor is very pro of these types of things. The Michigan Department of Education, if you've ever watched the Michigan Department of Education board meeting, you will know they were all over these things. That's eye-opening. I suggest you all do that if you haven't ever watched one of those meetings stream live. Just witness what goes on at that table. Michigan Education Association, again, there's so many organizations, but then it even comes down to a lot of these schools are using the CASEL framework, that social emotional program. And basically, they collaborate with over 40 states, and 90% of the school districts use CASEL. We work with state education agencies implementing social emotional learning. Their framework is used in almost all SEL programs and teaches all skills through an equity lens. The integral part of education advances equity and addresses various inequities. It's woven into all educational experiences. I could go on, but it is used as a lever for equity to create more inclusive and a just, equitable world. That's kind of what CASEL stands for, but they work with so many of these other organizations. And what shows up in the classroom are things that sound good, like hallway heroes and the leader in me and second step. But CASEL has 86 different social emotional learning programs. So some of those titles sound great. The leader in me, and it doesn't sound offensive. I'm not worried about that. But when you look into some of them, they have some parts and components that really focus on a lot of the things I mentioned in the CASEL framework. They're embedded in there. So CASEL has so many different things that they do, and again, they really want it systemically implemented into schools. Not just from the top, but like from the bottom and into the community. So essentially, they work with the administration, they work with the district, they work at the classroom level, and then they also do things in the community level from the parents up in. They're trying to get buy-in for this whole program. So CASEL has some very aggressive verbiage on their website, and again, all the slides are going to be available. You can read everything. I don't want to read every quote, but there's a lot going on this slide, and a lot of the stuff that's pretty scary. So here's some of the programs we talked about that they have, but they have 86 different or 84 different programs. So you have to be very cautious and curious with your school. Ask questions, what programs are we using? Can I see some of the curriculum? And again, then you decide for yourself. You know, I mean, it's not your perception and your ideas of what's acceptable could vary from person to person. So you just need to ask the questions and look into it. This is the CASEL wheel. When you start seeing this wheel, you know they're using CASEL. But the Michigan Department of Education launched an outreach plan, Children Matter, You Matter, Learn SEL. And this whole program is through, again, using CASEL. So this is basically the virtual training for the teachers, and this is right from the website. So this is some of the stuff that they're teaching in these programs that they're promoting teachers to take in the state of Michigan. Cognitive, behavioral, and social emotional needs, right? Okay, so when you look at the different trainings, the free online DEI and SEL courses for your staff. Michigan Cares, the most comprehensive mental health prevention education program. So again, they're getting right into the whole psyche of our kids with mental health piece. This is some of the training. These are the free trainings they're promoting. Anti-racism and social justice teaching and leadership. I've highlighted some statements you can read on the slides, but they're very aggressive in terms of that way. Social emotional learning and equity. And again, these are the programs that they're pushing free for teachers to take in our state as training. And then we also get into the Michigan Model for Health, which is a whole other rabbit hole. It is very frightening. It's something you should look into if you're not familiar with it. But they do as well have trainings for that, and that gets into the social emotional learning, but then it also pulls into a lot of the other sexual stuff that goes on. So that's a comprehensive health education curriculum targeting pre-K through 12th grade students, and it is a selected curriculum by CASEL. It's supposed to be age appropriate, but I think my definition of age appropriate and theirs are two different things, but nobody asked me and asked as a parent. But Michigan Model for Health is definitely something you should look into and be aware of. They do have, the mission is to do the whole child, whole self. So every aspect of the child, not just social, emotional, but also achievement and also their health and even medical. It's like a whole process of kind of encompassing everything and bringing that available through the school, through the health system, the health clinics and things like that. Here's just some statistics. There's a rise in anxiety, especially among children since COVID happened. I can say, working in the special ed sector, that probably by the time middle school hits, 95% of my clients' children have anxiety and or depression, in addition to their learning disabilities. So I can see that that's happened in the special ed population, but we also know statistically it's happening across the board with children. During 2020, you can see the number of prescriptions for antidepressants for children that were issued, ages 5 through 16, 20% increase in primary school children antidepressant prescriptions, 23% increase in secondary school children antidepressants. So suicide is the 8th leading cause of death in children ages 5 to 11. So we've got some really significant problems with mental health. But from the perspective of mental health in general, mental health support has always been available in school for children. The schools have social workers, they have school psychologists. Obviously in the realm, I know a lot of the children that I advocate for do get mental health services, very specific to their needs with their disabilities and the emotional things that come with that. And that sometimes that can be very good and very helpful for kids, but that's with a very designated plan. We know what the child needs, the parents are aware, they're involved in the process, and there are goals and things that they're working on specifically with that child. But when we look at doing a blanket social emotional program and every kid's different, we start getting into very personal things with kids, and parents aren't aware of what's going on and what's being taught and what's being discussed. But if a child really has a need, I mean, through special education, they can get social emotional support through social work at school. You don't have to have an IEP. In Michigan, it is considered a related service. So children without an IEP can get social work support. So that's something that has always been available, and the school has an obligation to identify these students that are having trouble, whether it's academically or with social emotional things, or their disabilities, or potentially having a disability. They do have a child find law. It's a federal law that they have to identify kids that might need some support, and then that child should be evaluated. That process involves the parent, not just teaching and doing things without the parent knowing. Let's see. Yeah, well, I'm trying to do anything else I didn't cover on there. No, I think that's pretty much that on there. So we talked about children with special needs, but when we look at kids that are struggling with anxiety and or depression, and sometimes parents are aware that that's happening, some of these kids can qualify for a 504 plan, where they just get that emotional support and some accommodations, reasonable accommodations in class to help them. That could look like working with a social worker, learning to just identify what their triggers are for anxiety-inducing things in school, how they can best avoid those things in school. Maybe, seeding them away from distractions in class where things cause them more anxiety, or maybe giving them more time to take a test because they're having test anxiety. So there are things that can be done, and even with special education and mental health. So if a child has some social emotional challenges, we can get the right support for them individually. It doesn't need to be embedding social emotional learning and teaching them what to think about all these things. There are ways to get them mental health supports. So what can parents do? I think the biggest thing you can do is you have to ask questions. You have to know what's going on in school. If you are unsure, you need to write to them and ask, can I see the curriculum? Parents do have rights to look at some of these things. Even as far as the sex ed curriculum, you do have a right to review that and decide if you want to opt your child out of sex ed and perhaps handle it the way that you want to handle it at home for your family, what fits. I think the hardest part is not knowing what's going on, because I never thought that there would be CRT in my son's school, ever. And I was surprised when I opened this can of worms what I found. We even had classes on how math was racially biased and unjust in our school, and I was like, what? And then of course I went on there and it was removed from the website. Interesting. But they've scrubbed the website. Our school website's been scrubbed of all of us now, because I started looking at this 3 years ago. It was out there because nobody was looking. It's all gone from the website now, so you can't access it. So it really involves a lot of questions. And don't be afraid to go to a board meeting and talk to them about what you're concerned about. I'm not saying that always results in something, but it doesn't hurt to go and speak to them and express your concerns and ask questions and see if they can follow up with you. Understand your parental rights. Parents do have the right to opt out of surveys and sex ed. Great Schools Initiative does have some opt-out forms. They're a Michigan nonprofit. They do a lot in this sector. They do a great job. I think also getting to know other parents. Have a parent group. Like I said, my mom chat phased me because sometimes I miss an email. I'm busy with work. And they said, did y'all see the survey coming out? I'm like, whoa, no, I didn't. Where is it? So if you can collaborate and have a thing with a couple of other parents, I think sometimes when you miss something, somebody else can point it out. You can all kind of stand together and help each other understand what's going on more in the school. So essentially, read your school communications and emails. I also recommend looking at your kids' homework. I've seen some very shady homework assignments from other kids with topics that parents may not be comfortable with. Also, you want to look into your school libraries, understand what your library's policies are on books that are extremely sexually explicit. Do they allow everyone to check them out? Do they have those books in your library? There's ways that you can look into that online. If you feel your child's struggling at school, either emotionally, behaviorally, or academically, definitely reach out to your school staff and discuss a 504 plan or an IEP. There's also the Michigan Alliance for Families, which is a free state organization where they give you guidance on special education, and that's a free service. Every state has one, and that's the one for Michigan. And essentially, I'm just going to leave up there my contact information if you have any needs about special education. The QR code takes you to my website. But again, I think the biggest thing as parents can do is just to be very aware and just know what's going on. Ask the questions, and if you don't get the answers, ask again or ask somebody else, because this stuff's going on. I never set out to even want to know any of this stuff. And it was an afternoon of, I asked some questions and I was on the website, and here I am a couple years later, so. But that's it. I appreciate you guys listening, and I hope that there was something enlightening. We're going to make the slides available online. Okay. Yeah, I mean, does anybody have questions? If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Yes.
I just want to make a comment.
Yeah.
There's a very simple solution to all this identity politics related crap going not just in schools but everywhere. It's called restoring the meritocracy, period. You know? And all the time, effort, and money that's spent on this identity politics stuff should instead be channeled into creating opportunities for everybody. And that's it. It's that simple.
I got a question. On all the stuff that you're showing that is the CAL or CRT, where would you see that show up? I think the only place I'm seeing it show up in my daughter's education right now is more history, maybe English, where there's certain assignments for reading, but I think they kind of slip some of this in with, an angle all the time, or there's a story about something bad that happened in America, somebody was treated or mistreated, and then, but it's only half the story most of the time. But where would you see most of this stuff inserted? Would you say those particular topics?
I see it across the board. Okay, so the question was, is what area would you hear or see some of the questionable material in terms of school classroom topics or curriculums? I'm going to be honest, from the people that I've spoken to and just what I've uncovered, I think you see it everywhere. I have had clients email me assignments. I had a child is disabled with dyslexia and a couple of other learning disabilities, and she sent me an English assignment her daughter was given, and it was talking about how children of color should be graded on a different scale than children that were white, because it wasn't fair. And this was sent to a student with dyslexia who's in high school and can't read. I mean, and so they had to write a paper about this, about why they thought it should or shouldn't be. So it creeps into that. It creeps into math problems. I've seen math problems where it's a simple math problem, like there are so many oranges or whatever. It'll be like Bob and his partner Tom have. It's like, well, why do we have to have? Like, can we just say there are 12 oranges in one basket and 4 in another? I mean, why do we need to pull in things about sexual identity? I mean, it doesn't matter whether there's a heterosexual couple or a homosexual couple or whatever other ones there are, because I can't keep track of them all, but it doesn't even need to be a part of the conversation. That's where I'm at. Like, can we just stick to academics, right? So I've seen it in math, in story problems. I've seen it in English assignments. I've seen it in history. My son's sign language class being asked to sign 9 different genders. Like, it's just making its way in everywhere. And that's why you have to be diligent, Yeah. Oh, you mic? Okay, perfect.
I would suggest going to the school board meetings. Yes. I've been attending the Oxford school board meetings, and that's all they talk about is SEL.
Yeah.
No, nothing about academics so much, but it's always about a new SEL program they're initiating.
And you're right too. You look at the budget and you can see where sometimes they're spending more money on some of these programs. And what's sad, or something else I'll point out, I know for some of you staying, part of the workshop later, I'm doing a workshop on how to find data on your schools and how they're performing. So the Michigan School Data website, you can go on there and you can take a look at performance for different grades, different subjects. You can see SAT performance, college readiness. You can look at all of this information and you can see the trend, and you can see where these scores in many, many schools are declining. Okay, I know that COVID was part of it, but you would think that they would decline because of COVID, but with being back in school, things would start to level up, go back up for teaching. That the more we take time away from core academics to introduce these topics, how do we expect our children to maintain that level of learning academically? Because you saw on the slides, they're putting it in everything and they're making it a conversation. So all the time being spent on it, you kind of wonder, where does that correlate with the decline we're seeing in academic performance and proficiency? Who else had a question? Yes.
Hi, yes. Curious to get your take on kids with special needs. I have grandson who was on the spectrum diagnosed with autism. They have an IEP, and they're already dealing with getting our type of children in that community educated. Now, bringing in this SEL stuff, have they done any studies on how that's affecting our population, the kids? It's greatly now, the kids that have joined the spectrum and been diagnosed with autism, who's trying to have social and emotional ABA help and all of those things. But for my grandson, who went from ABA and special education to mainstream school, how have they done any studies how that's going to affect them? Because I know how it's going to affect him. We're trying to get social and emotional regular issues dealt with without this stuff coming on them through their curriculum and their classmates that we have. They're not, in their mind, they have brain injuries. So to get them to understand, to say I'm a boy or I'm a girl, I have issues with that. And is anyone addressing that in this hierarchy of putting all this stuff down on our generation of kids, especially our special need kids?
No, that is a great question, and I wish I had the exact statistic with me, but I can be in touch with you after and get it to you. One of the studies I looked at said that, and I can't remember the exact number, so I hate to misquote, but I want to say it was either kids with autism were 4 or 5 times more likely to identify sexually differently.
Of course, they want to fit in.
And, you know, I'm a special needs mom. My son has special needs, and I can tell you that when your child is different, they struggle socially in so many different ways from a very young age. So what happens is that to fit in and to find their place, they often do and accept things that maybe they normally wouldn't. They're more impressionable because developing friendships is very hard with many of the disabilities that the kids I see have. So they sometimes then compromise that and think, oh, but these kids over here in this group that identify different are getting all this attention and they're welcoming me into the group, and I just have to do this, this, and this to be part of that group. So there are some statistics out there that show that children with some of the disabilities, specifically autism, do have gender dysphoria issues like 4 or 5 times greater rate. So it is a concern. I also know that I did see some programs done by the state. I believe they were the state programs, and they were talking about sexuality for children that are disabled, and they have a whole different program. And some of the stuff I saw on there was stuff I wouldn't want, personally working with the autism population a lot, as I do, knowing the way their minds work and knowing some of the challenges they have. It's not a program I would want my kid in if I had to bear autism. So I think you're asking the right questions, and we can connect afterwards, and I can try to get you the information as well. And I think, yeah.
You said 9% of the teachers identify as LGBTQ persons. That doesn't seem in line with the general population. Would you say that's because of influence or because of the schools intentionally choosing LGBTQ?
Yeah, that was actually on Jim's slides. So yeah, Jim, can you pass the microphone over? That's a great question, because I know I have looked in the past just in general at the percentage of population that identifies differently, and there's some very strange numbers there, so go ahead.
So I couldn't say for a fact. I think you're getting along the lines of, are they intentionally going into schools? To a point. So here's the one thing I would say. 9% right now. I just read a Gallup poll that said 20% of all Gen Zers identify as LGBTQ, and that 10% of millennials, my generation, identify as LGBTQ. So are the numbers going to go down? I guess if you could look at those, at that poll, your answer would be absolutely not. I don't see it stopping, also because of what I was also talking about, is that this is what the teachers are taught at the university. So either you get on board with it, or you're just desensitized to it. And if you aren't, let's say you're the 1% who makes it through and you start a teaching career, when you start as a teacher, you still have to do all of these SEL, DEI, CRT, restorative justice practices. You have to do all of these trainings that if you don't, many of the teachers are put on the spot.
So you're saying these people are, they're either, it's by influence or programming,
By
because
design.
they're basically caving in. and saying, okay, I'll walk the walk so I can hold my job, keep my job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and you know, I have seen, not particularly just on the LGBTQ issue, but I have seen ads for schools where they've actually put in there that they want people with very liberal views. There's a private school that had an ad out there, a job advertisement on Indeed or one of those, and I don't have a reputation, but there's another one I do. And I can't remember the verbiage they asked for, but it was somebody who was extremely progressive, and it was very clear that they wanted somebody that would be embracing of a number of topics that maybe some of us, you know, would in this room maybe want to be a priority focus for their child at school. Are there any other questions? Are we good? Yeah, thank you so much. There's no questions up here, actually.
Thank you, Maria. That was really great information. And, you know, that's the thing is we have so much that is out there. And we just have to be aware. And I'm hopeful that with these speakers that are going to be here sharing with you today, that your awareness is going to be piqued. And if you maybe have some questions, you know, all of the slides that Maria used will be on our website. It's libertyleadersunite.org, and we will have all the information on our website. It may not be there in the next day, but it will eventually be there. We will put it up there, and we are really about informing everyone about really what's going on. We're not creating any lies. We're not creating things. We're just bringing factual information to the public. And again, libertyleadersunite.org is our website, and we're going to take about a 15-minute break to grab something to eat as well as network. And so for those of you live streaming, give us about 15 minutes and we will be back. So thank you.
Adjust this. Come on this side. Yeah, I'm going to, it's too high. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, it's online now. It's online. Yeah, I can hold it for you.
Oh, you want me to come back near? Come back close? Or stay here?
Just stay there, just a minute.
All right. And look at you, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Minister Angelique Johnson, and I work with LLU United, and I'm here today to witness what the information is going out. I think that it's very imperative to get this type of information. It's very basic ground on the bottom ground of teaching us to understand what's going on in our kids' schools today. And the information that I gained from today from the speakers that are here is dynamic. It's things that I haven't heard before. And so as a grandmother of a 10-year-old in the public school system, I think that the things that I heard today will cause me to go look into things deeper and more, and to stand up and advocate for our children, not just mine, but the rest of them. And the information that I'm gathered and learning here from today, I can take this information and spread to others and give it out. I literally went live because the information was so poignant that when the speakers were speaking on things, you need to hear this. And I need to be able to say, listen, this is why I'm against this or for this that's going on in my kids' school. I have a grandson who's on the spectrum, and with some of this information that's being forced down onto our children, I'm concerned about how that's going to affect his learning. He already has the social and emotional things that we've been working on for years and going in a positive direction. I wouldn't want any of the information that they were telling us about that's coming into the school system, into the curriculum, causing him to backtrack or causing him to just go along because it's what my teacher suggested or what the curriculum is saying. Our children in the special education community has to be able to, the parents of the children in our community have to be able to understand what the system is trying to do and what the system has implemented and how that will affect our children in a special education environment and communities. So yes, this information today I haven't heard before, so I'm grateful and thankful that Leisha put this together, and that the speakers who came in to share this information with us who has experience, because these are things that they've been going through and watching and learning and digging into to get the information to bring it back out to us on elementary level, that we all as parents and grandparents could get activated to help save our children or to push back on what the narrative is.
Would you be specific a little bit for why you're so concerned about the certain aspect they talked about today?
Yeah, I'm concerned more specifically with the CRT aspect of it, and with the gender policies that's coming through for the kids in schools, as far as implementing programs to see if they have been the oppressor or the oppressed. Kids in our community, meaning the special education autism community, sometimes I don't. That's a problem. How are you going to teach my kids something in school that we're just trying to get their regular brain power onto social and emotional and environmental issues without that extra of wondering, are they the oppressed or they are an oppressor? That's something that they don't need. And another area is the gender fluid situation. Kids who have on the spectrum or have specific injuries or autism, that concept of are you, what gender are you, should not be in their curriculum. It should not. I'm very strongly against that because they're already at a disadvantage of fitting in sometimes and understanding themselves. Their brains just don't always work like that. Some of them do and can understand that, but some of them don't, and that's a real big concern to mine. I don't need you telling my grandson, or suggesting things to him that he's gonna take in as, okay, yes, I'm a girl, or I'm not a boy, or I'm not comfortable with myself, even more so than what they're already dealing with. As a grandparent who my grandchild lives with me, I see the what he needs, and what he doesn't need is that extra CRT or the gender equality stuff pushed down onto him while we're just getting him to a basic understanding of who he is, who we are as a family, and to keep up with the regular children in schools, meaning from special education to regular school, because that's what my grandchild did. He went from special education to mainstream school, and now you're going to add this on top of his studies, his learning, his other anxiety issues that come with kids on the spectrum. We really need to look into that. So yes, specifically, those are my issues.
Another question. So what do you think the effect of the empowering parent, the workshop?
I think the effect of empowering parents is most prominent right now. It's the basis for giving us a foundation to stand on and to speak up for ourselves and our children and other people's children in our community. We all pay taxes whether we have kids that go to the school system or not, and we all have family members with children. So it's imperative that what they taught us here today to get this message out so that all of Michigan can hear this information, and frankly, all of the United States. As more people come forward that works in those environments, like the person who was speaking was a teacher, and being in those environments, he's able to come outside and give us real life experience of not something he read or heard, but what he experienced. And so it's imperative that what happened here today is a good thing, and we need more of it.
Anything else you would like to say?
Thank you to Liberty Leader United for even putting together a event like this. I think this is just the start of something really fabulous to go from here and go on to bigger things. So thank you.
What do you think of this workshop?
It's interesting, but like I said, the solution to all this stuff about DEI, CRT, which is all identity politics, the simple solution to all that is you got to restore the meritocracy, period. Okay, and all the time, effort, and money that's put into this identity politics related stuff,
like DEI, CRT, must instead be used on creating opportunities for everybody. And that's about it.
What do you think you learned today?
Well, much of the same, how messed up things are. Things are getting more messed up every day. You know, I'm getting numb to this because it's the same thing over and over again. And something's got to be done about it.
What do you think you can do?
I really don't know. Just continue talking to people, network with people, with like-minded people. Maybe somehow what we hear will get into some people in government, get people in government to listen to us, get some like-minded people into government, especially into our school boards and educational facilities.
May I have your name?
John Zupank.
What is their last name?
Zupanc.
As a parent, why it's important to be aware of what's going on here?
Well, I'm not a parent, but it bothers me. I hate to see what's happening to Western civilization, not just this country, but Western civilization. You know, I'm sure that the people in China are laughing at us. The kids there go to school to learn. You know, they have a meritocracy in there, and those people are going to become really dangerous. And I don't mean it in a really bad way. They're going to be dangerous. They're going to be so smart.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, so thank you everybody. We're going to get started. I hope you guys got some food and were able to connect with some awesome people, and so it's really awesome. So thank you so much for being here. And anybody that's joining online, thank you again. Again, libertyleadersunite.org is our website, and you can text the number up here. This is for prayer requests and questions, and that is available 24/7. And so let's get started. Hold on, now my phone is not working. Okay, hold on. Sorry. You know, don't you just love it when you have something all set up and then you accidentally touch it and it doesn't work anymore? So, okay, just give me a minute. So our next speaker is the founder and president of Atlanta-based Truth in Education, a 501c3 that educates parents through exposing harmful anti-Christian trends, curriculum, and policies in the school systems. Rhonda has been politically involved for over 20 years with both local and national organizations, and has worked with legislators on bills and issues that affect education, children, and families. She's a member of Eagle Forum and Heritage Sentinels. Rhonda has raised money for nonprofits such as Tallulah Falls School and several foster care ministries. In addition, she served on the board of Center for Opportunity and is current board of advisor for Public School Exit. Always ministry-minded, Rhonda is a national speaker who works with like-minded organizations to inspire parents to advocate for their children. She and her husband have 2 adult children. Please welcome Rhonda Thomas.
Thank you, Leisha. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about being here today, and I'm going to piggyback actually on what Maria did, so there'll be some SEL in here, I think from a different perspective. But we educate for parents for parental rights. We educate legislators on legislation, as Leisha was saying, and we also encourage parents to get very involved in their schools. So the one thing I want to talk about today is social-emotional learning from a different perspective. Social-emotional learning is about rewiring our children's brains. It is neuroplasticity. Actually, our question is, why are we teaching or using psychotherapy with our children? psychotherapy is, we're using it on all our children, and not all our children need help. So we're basically using this on children that are not in need of mental health. I'm like Leisha now, I can't find a little, just one second. Okay, so what is psychotherapy? It is the general, I lost it again, my goodness. Just a moment. All plans seem to not always go perfectly. Psychotherapy is the general term for treating psychological disorders and mental distress through verbal and psychological techniques. It's known to as talk therapy, counseling, psychological therapy, or simply therapy. There is no need for all of our children to be underneath a therapist for psychotherapy. Our education has basically moved away from academics into therapeutic education. Core academics is no longer the focus in our schools. If you've never heard of Dr. James Giordano, I encourage you to Google him. He is part of DARPA, the Department of Defense. He's a professor of neurology and biochemistry. He is also a researcher for the EU and holds many other titles. Dr. Giordano speaks to different groups. He's part of the Brain Institute. This is from a video where he's speaking to West Point. And he talks about that it's very important that they remember 3 different things. 3 A's: access, assess, and affect. He says if you can understand what someone is thinking and what they're feeling, then in fact they can understand how your brain works and how to access it and how to affect it. This reminded me of social emotional learning. The ability to assess the brain and its functions, the ability to assess the brain on a variety of levels, including the social, the ability to affect the brain in the individuals with whom those are embodied. And he talks about the power that this puts at your fingertips. Maria touched on this, but I want to bring out the point that the gentleman that started CASEL was very close to the Fetzer Institute. Mr. Fetzer's mentor was Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey was the founder of the Luciferian Publishing Company. There is an occult backing to social emotional learning. The Fetzer Institute's mission is helping build the spiritual foundations of a loving world. I want to say that SEL is the New World religion. I attended a 2-day conference out of New York. It was on spirituality at the core of every child. It was 2 days of Hinduism, Buddhism, the spirit, Gandhi, mindfulness. Do you all have mindfulness in your schools? They touched on the fact that mindfulness is the reason they're using this in our schools is because the churches and the parents have instilled beliefs in them that they want to change, kind of what Maria was saying. They want to be able to clear that slate and to bring in all the ideologies that they want to see move forward in our schools and in our children. I'll pass this. This just goes back to, this is just a few of the organizations involved in partnering with or funding with CASEL. We are teaching cultural competencies. They are no longer core competencies. That's not important for the future workforce. So we are teaching the New Green Deal in our schools, that private property is bad. We are pushing climate change. We talk about, of course, pansexual, critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion. You'll find Black Lives Matter curriculum in your school. Comprehensive sex ed. This all falls under and is taught through the lens of social emotional learning. And it's all based on data collecting, which we believe is building a social credit score on your child. And not just the child, the parent also. So an example, this is throughout every subject in school. You cannot opt out of social emotional learning without opting out of school. You can opt out of the surveys. You can opt out of the wellness circles that happen in the morning. And you can opt out of counseling, and I would recommend you do that. because they're not qualified, and most of them are not licensed psychologists. If they're not, you should not be subjecting your child to any type of mental health therapy through that counselor. They're mostly college and career counselors. So this is just an example. If a history teacher might say something about the history of white oppression, and then the child goes to math class and the math teacher asks, how is math not equitable? This is stealth, guys. The children aren't going to pick up on it, and most of the times the parents don't. But this is woven throughout their day. We were talking about math earlier. Our math standards in Georgia, I don't know what yours are, but they included the term real world. That opens it up to everything. You can bring the real world into math issues. You can bring in the homosexuality. You can bring in the critical race theory. All through just that term in those standards. So SEL, and I want to say SEL for social emotional learning, the goal is to change our students' language, thoughts, behaviors, and personal relationships. That's huge. What comes through personal relationships? Our relationship with our Savior, our knowledge. It's what we did during COVID, right? We social distanced and it really harmed our children. Social emotional learning is about helping you find your voice, and that voice is whatever you want it to be, or your identity. So this is an example of how we're creating activism in our children. You should check your schools and see if you have an Echo Club. This is in Georgia, where the United Nations is actually coming in and doing a sustainability conference on climate change. And guess what? They're creating change makers. That is activism. Unfortunately, we all want our children to advocate for good things, but it might not be what you want your child to activate for. So we have a psychologist on our board, and he says that the bell curve used to have a steady mean. It's no longer that way. It's fluid. And they did that so they could bring activism into education. So this is an ad that was placed to recruit high schoolers and middle schoolers from different counties in Georgia. And it was all to bring them in to educate them on diversity, equity, inclusion, so that they would go back into their schools and promote DEI. The books on the left are actually from the Georgia School Counseling Association's website. It's all about anti-police, anti-violence, and everything, most everything that's happening in our schools is coming through the counseling department. So there are 45 communist goals that were actually established in 1963. They're in our congressional record. We've accomplished every one of those goals except for the very last one, and that's the International Court. But the reason I bring this up is because 43 of our United States K through 12 libraries are exempt from the obscenity law. We can fight the books all day long, but they are legally in our libraries. Until that is until schools remove from that loophole, these books will not come out of our schools on a permanent basis. We need to continue fighting them, we need to highlight them, and we need to continue every year presenting a bill that is a simple bill that just says, remove K through 12 libraries from the obscenity exemption. Again, until that's removed, they'll be in our schools. So number 24 of those 45 goals is to eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, and TV. Number 26, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. I believe they've accomplished that. We're doing it in our schools. Addiction to pornography with minors is on the rise. There's actually an article that I had that's even in the military. Those parents are fighting kid-on-kid sex, sexual attacks. This is a serious issue for not only our children, guys, but for our country. This is way beyond our children. So this is a book that's for 10 to 14-year-olds. I would imagine it's in some of your schools. It's called It's Perfectly Normal. It's not, I hate to say this is not bad, but this is not bad compared to a lot of books. I did a quick search in Michigan in your Utica High School, and there's one book, I just put in one. It's called The Bluest Eye, and it is there. So you have these books in your libraries, and they're very pornographic. They're depraved. They contain incest, pedophilia, drugs, rape, everything. This is way beyond, it's heartbreaking what's being taught and shown to our children. Not only that, I want to tell you this is trauma. We are setting the stage to bring in the mental health bills into our states and to bring school-based health clinics into our schools. We're creating the mental health issues in our schools with our children. And SEL is what they're using to do it. So the psychologist on our board explains it like this. Your child leaves your home feeling confident and loved. They enter these schools and they're on an unlevel playing field. Every day, all day long, they're experiencing trauma. It's trauma when a boy goes into a girl's bathroom. It's trauma when your best friend in second grade says they want to be a girl instead of a boy. It's trauma when you're sitting in these wellness circles, and all of a sudden, because SEL teaches teachers and counselors to become a friend and a buddy and a trusted advisor, they remove that authority line. Now they're telling them to share some of their problems, hoping the children will share back with them. So one parent told me their child came home and was saying, I don't want to be divorced. I don't want to have money problems. This is trauma to these children, guys, and we're allowing it. Not only that, when they read or see one of these books, what if they've been sexually assaulted? Then it triggers that. Not only that, it can create the addiction. It creates confusion. Basically, the blood starts running from the back of their head, and it never reaches the prefrontal cortex, and we are causing harm to our children. This is the ALA's new president, Emily Drabinsky, who basically thinks that education needs to be the site of socialist organizing. She came out and said she is a Marxist. So this is who is in charge of the ALA. We need to all be in touch with our legislators. Some states have already done it and said, remove us. We do not need to be under an organization that believes in Marxism. We're a republic. We need to remove that. The graph on the other side is from their website about all the books that we are banning. By the way, they're being challenged, but if a book is banned, you cannot buy it, you cannot check it out. None of the books that are being challenged are being banned. They can still be bought on Amazon or other sites. So we're not banning books. We're asking them to curate the books in a more appropriate manner. If you're going to have drag queens doing drag queen story hour, then you're going to end up with child drag queens. This was a couple of years ago. This little child was dancing for money in bars. This is all falls under comprehensive sex ed. You cannot separate SEL, diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory, or CSE. They're all one thing, all taught through the lens of social emotional learning. The comprehensive sex ed is straight from the United Nations. Everything in our schools is coming through UNESCO, the education arm of the United Nations. We follow the national sexuality standards, which were not written by anyone in our country, but we all have adopted them. They were written by the UN, by Human Rights, by the ACLU, by the International Planned Parenthood. Now, who is going to have the best interest out for our children? It will not be these NGOs that are involved in our schools. So comprehensive sex ed teaches children that they're sexual at birth, that they can pleasure themselves. It teaches that parents that disagree with you about your sexual preferences are oppressors. It's all about breaking down the family. It teaches 9-year-olds how to put on a condom. It also teaches them to say things like, I like it when you touch me there. We are creating a generation that is going to be groomed for pedophilia and sex trafficking. Already in California, there's a law that you can have a sex with anyone as long as there's no more than 10 years apart. This is grooming our children for a huge market that's already taking place in our country to traffic our children. Is anyone familiar with the Frankfurt School out of Germany? Well, the Frankfurt School believed that their philosophy was to push compulsory promiscuity, one-parent households, premarital sex, and homosexuality to strike at the core of Western society, to destroy the family, and to bring about Marxism. We would really have to be in the dark if we don't see this happening, not only in our schools, but in our country. This is a global agenda. You will find what's happening here in every other country. We are a little bit harder to break, so they're hitting us a little harder. Our faith. So this is more trauma. I'm going to give you an example. This was a lesson in a high school in Georgia. These children had to come up with a model of solving world hunger. Again, that's a UN agenda. They wanted to solve world hunger by raising and eating human babies. So we're teaching cannibalism. Are we normalizing cannibalism like we did homosexuality a few years ago? The same time this was going on, children in the 9th grade in another county were reading a book on death, starvation, and cannibalism. And if you look around at what's happening in our music, in our books, in TV, cannibalism is becoming very prevalent. So they came up with this model. I'll read it to you because you can't read theirs, but it says basically if you have a child, you're not going to be able to keep it, so that's okay, we'll take care of it for you. I find this ironic since we just went through COVID. We'll give it a vaccine, it probably won't live, so we won't bury it because, again, we're protecting the earth, right? It's a religion, guys. This is a world religion. So what we'll do is we'll make hamburgers out of it and we'll feast on it. And then they went into how they can make beef jerky out of it. This is trauma. All day long, our children are experiencing trauma. Okay, so their mass production was for the United States to reach out to China because they're overpopulated. So they can start sending their children over here. We can take them from foster care and other organizations, and we can help solve the UN's agenda of poverty. By the way, everything that is promoted by the UN, take poverty, they're creating poverty. Literacy is a big term right now, but guess what? We're creating illiterate children. And you can see that through the fact that our kids cannot read and write. This was called the Dahmer Mini Camp. And their second plan was, we've got you covered, you make them, and you make them and we'll bake them. My Friend Dahmer is a graphic novel in our schools, many of our schools. Most of our books now are graphic novels because they're much more powerful with the child. But I would say also our children can't read. But this makes much more of an impression on our children. And if you look at some of these books, I would say The Handmaid's Tale is a graphic novel. It's pretty powerful. Maria touched on surveys, but I just want to say one thing about surveys. And you touched on this, so I'm going to skip that. Is that we recommend that you have an attorney send in your opt-out form. Because just as Maria said earlier, they don't pay attention to the parents. We've even had parents tell us that their teacher has offered them pizza parties because this affects the climate rating of the schools and the monies that they get. They have to have a certain percentage of these surveys back. So we always recommend go in with other parents, but get an attorney to send in your surveys, and I guarantee you they will think twice before your child takes that survey. You can opt out of every single one of them. But I will also tell you they're used for many different reasons. One example would be in Georgia. I was at the Capitol a couple of weeks before session started last year, and there were 6 mental health organizations there, and you could hear them sharing the questions to our surveys from our children. They needed that data in order to go and prove that they needed all this funding for these school-based health clinics. If you have a child that's taking a survey and they're submitting that data, the surveys are so negative, you will never have anything positive in these surveys. There is no way that it would not look like a child did not need mental health therapy. And it's not just on them, it's on you also. They ask questions like, how many times a week do you bathe? How many times a week have you had sex? How many times a week have you thought of committing suicide? How many times a week did you plan your suicide? No child will ever not need mental health. And this is a huge money maker for these states. I'm going to go back, excuse me. I don't know. Well, I don't know how to go back. Okay, thank you. So this is just a little example for you to see how everything is taught through the lens of SEL. So there, as Maria said, are 5 tenets of SEL. Self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, responsible skills, and social awareness. This is comprehensive sex ed. Everything that is taught through those 5 tenets. So SEL is always in the center, and then the subject of your teaching is taught through all of those behavioral, emotional, feelings, no critical thinking, no logic. This is kindergarten. This is part of an AMAZE comprehensive sex ed program. A parent just was upset and called me. Their school, a Christian school by the way, is starting this. And this comes straight from Advocates for Youth, who is attached to Planned Parenthood, who's attached to UNESCO. But this basically teaches a kindergarten that it doesn't matter how you're born, it's what you think, how you feel, and how you express yourself. So again, SEL is about helping you find your identity. It does not matter what that identity is. It can be a furry. A furry is a child that identifies as an animal. It's real. I interviewed 2 7th grade students, and they told me all about the furries in their schools. They can't wear a hat, but the furries can wear collars, and their friends can pull them by leashes. They have animal costumes on. They're very rowdy, but yet these kids can't talk. And I will tell you that there are some schools, and it was being mentioned earlier, that are actually allowing litter boxes in their schools. I have a friend that teaches nursing, and they had to turn down a student because her one accommodation was an adult-sized litter box. If you think about comprehensive sex ed, we are grooming these children for bestiality. This is very serious. Why would we not stop this immediately and get the child help instead of encouraging it and let it go on? But that's exactly what they do. So it affects the bathrooms. I can tell you, I won't go into this too deeply, but there are kids that can't have to go to the bathroom at certain times. A parent called me. Their 5th grader could only go to the restroom twice a day, and they had to go in groups. Because the teacher said if you allow kids to think they're animals, they'll act like animals. And the maintenance was having to go in between those shifts and clean up their bathrooms. That's trauma. Again, if a boy wants to go in a girl's bathroom, this is critical race theory is alive and well, and again, it's being taught through the lens of social emotional learning. This is a video that was played to elementary students. Again, everything that we have is online. We don't have books anymore. These are live videos. They can be pulled at any time. I would tell you that probably our administration and teachers half the time don't even know what our kids are seeing. And then they can go past that out into other third parties and pick up more. But we're going to play this one.
Reverse racism is a little complicated, but the simple answer is no. It is not real. Although all of us have the ability
just about white people. I want to tell you, this is about creating a hate factory in our schools. They are creating hate between the different cultures and black and brown children, white children, for a purpose. They need children they can control. We're creating activists, remember? We showed you the 2 things up here on the screen. We're teaching them to go out and be change makers, and you have to have angry children to be able to do that. This is a transgender teaching safe sex to middle schoolers. We won't play this one just because it's a little bit long. But basically, he is teaching them that condoms are 99.9% safe, which we know is a lie. He also is teaching them about birth control. He does touch on abstinence for just a second. But he also says that his dad didn't agree with his lifestyle, so you don't have to tell your parents. Again, we are teaching our children to lie to their parents. How can we not be shocked that our families are breaking down when our school systems are teaching them to disrespect their parents? Our teachers and our counselors have removed the role of authority and become their friends. Our children are really in harm's way. This is, you can play this one. This is Brain Pop, an app on most of our children's Chromebooks, and this was played to 6-year-olds.
May 22nd, he was an iconic leader of the gay rights movement in the 1970s. Today, he's honored as a pioneer in the fight to end discrimination against the entire LGBT community. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Some people prefer the broader term queer. That includes anyone who isn't heterosexual and all members of the LGBT community. Together, the community identifies as LGBTQ+.
What child's going to understand that at 6 years old? They aren't. But part of SEL is keeping them in confusion. This is causing anxiety. As the psychologist on our board says, he used to see children in their practice that cut every 3 to 4 months. It's every week now. They're seeing things in children they've never seen before, and that's why he's stepping out and he's speaking. And he attributes it all to social emotional learning. This is, I did it again. This is actually from the Georgia School Counseling Association's website. It was part of a webinar. The books on the top are for teachers to self-reflect on their biases. The books on the bottom are for the teachers and the counselors to work with our students as they self-reflect on theirs. This is from a webinar from our school counselors. Examine the impact of white privilege on your school community. Understand and recognize white privilege personally. How are students and families of color seen, described, and treated? I want to tell you, I have a friend that's my age that went back to get her degree in counseling, and it was in Birmingham, Alabama, this past 2 years. The first semester, she had to get an attorney because she was scared she wouldn't get her grades and get to go somewhere else if she got kicked out. But basically, a professor was accusing her of debunking critical race theory. The last semester, she was going back and forth with a professor over men having babies. Her statement was, Rhonda, they are teaching these young women to hate men, and they're teaching them all of this, and guess what, guys? They're coming out into our schools to be working with our children. They believe they are trained in mental health therapy because they're trained in social emotional learning. Social emotional learning mimics mental health. It is not mental health therapy. I attended a 2-day conference out of New York on spirituality. It was CASEL, and there's 2 sponsors were the Fetzer Institute and the Rockefeller Foundation. So it was, again, we touched on that earlier, so I won't touch on it again, but this is happening in our schools. There are meditation rooms in our schools for mindfulness. My daughter is a nanny, and her 4-year-old told me one day, because he was going to a school that has meditation, let me teach you how to do to meditate. So he steps me through all these practice positions and everything to teach me how to do this. I will tell you that this is undermining the gospel. As a Christian, it is undermining the gospel. So social emotional learning, I'll probably repeat a few things that Maria did, but it's on data collection through all those platforms. It impersonates mental health. This is actually in the other room on a table. It promotes activism and division. It's spiritually, mentally, and emotionally abusive. It's a world belief system, and it's changing our children to lean more toward and align with a Marxist agenda. Again, this goes to what Dr. Jones was talking about, that they're seeing PTSD in young children. They've never seen that. They're presenting as something like bipolar, which is not normal. So social emotional learning is very harmful to our children. And guess what? Many young people who are mistreated by an adult, victimized by bullies, and if you know, we have bullying and fighting in our schools are out of control. And it's all due to a program called Restorative Justice. It goes back to a policy written by Obama to stop the school-to-jail pipeline. There is a book that I wish you would write down and you would order. It's called Why Mero Died. It was written by Mero's father and Max Eden. The father was not upset with the school shooter at all. He was upset with the policies that were put into place. And if you read that book, you'll understand what's happening in our schools and why the children are out of control. They cannot do any type of discipline. In fact, I've had many teachers tell me that there could be a class action lawsuit for teachers against the harms the children have caused to them. I have a friend that has had her back broken. This is, again, trauma for these children. So,
the book name again?
Why Mero, M-E-A-D-O-W, died. She died in the Parkland shooting. Every school board member should have that. Every superintendent should have that. Every administrator and teacher should have that. But I will tell you, they can't put these kids out of the classroom. They can't put them in the hallway. They can't send them to the library. They all come back to the room. So there was a school resource officer in Georgia that told me that a 6-year-old was acting up. Of course, they can't do anything to restrain her or correct her. So he said, clear the room. They did. The child totally destroyed the classroom, and this is the saddest part. 3 times she said, there is no God, there is no God. Now, why would a 6-year-old say that? Mental health for all. I noticed in Michigan you have the same thing. There's universal mental health screening. I probably need to speak up here. Universal mental health screening. If they do universal screening, there does not need to be permission from the parents. That's why they brought that about. So with dyslexia, they're going to be screening every child. They want to label every child with something. So dyslexia, however, is a brain issue. So think of the money they'll make out of all that data. That data will go for research. So remember, you need to opt out of any type of universal screening. This is, it says at least one other social emotional support available for students at every tier level. So every child will be screened for something. This is a universal screener that was used by a teacher, and her student was not involved. But can you imagine a teacher having to answer 10 questions on her child? Again, remember, nothing's positive, right? None of these questions. Look at this. Do they steal? Do they lie? Do they cheat? Do they have peer rejection, behavioral problems, low academic achievement? All negative, all geared toward mental health. This is the multi-tiered student system, which you all have. I checked on that. Most schools, everybody does. But this used to have 4 levels. They removed the bottom level. The bottom level was for 80% of the children that didn't need anything. Now they've removed that, and now students receive services at all levels depending on their needs. So again, labels bring money. This is a school-based health clinic. I believe, do you all have them here, Maria? Okay. Georgia was one of the first 5 states to apply. They're on their 3rd round of grants. The grants that we have in Georgia for this year that they just received for school-based health clinics align with the Biden administration's executive orders, and they mandate gender dysphoria screening and the morning after pill. Why were we at the Capitol, and probably you all also, trying to pass bills to stop the divisiveness, the critical race theory in our schools, and to do something about the equity, when in fact, all of it is coming through our counselors and is coming through every mental health organization that's involved in our schools. Every one of them. You can go to their websites. They're full of equity. Racial trauma. I attended the National School Association, Counselor Association's conference. The 2 things, I was not surprised. I knew everything would be social justice, but the one thing that hit me was they believe their ethical duty is above the law. They'll advocate for their children by all means necessary. If they can't use pronouns, they'll use nicknames. If we can't talk about gender, we'll saturate our rooms in it. Doesn't God tell us that bad company corrupts? When you have a pride flag hanging and you have a picture of you and your partner and you have all these other things going on, that normalizes it among those children. So I have an example of that. A 4-year-old wanted to paint his nails red, and someone asked him why. He said, because my friend has his green. So this is a hill they will die on, guys. And we need to stand up and protect our children. This was a Maine dad that actually was upset that his 17-year-old daughter came home with a secret baggie of Zoloft through her school health clinic. I don't know about you guys, but in Georgia at 13, a child can make their own mental health and drug addiction decisions outpatient only. In some states, it's both outpatient and inpatient. And think about these health clinics. If my child is 13 and decides they want to start hormones and then puberty blockers and starts transitioning, I'll never know. Because that child can go to the clinic and say they're still scared to tell the parent. It falls under mental health, and then they just move them on out. So at 13, these children can make these decisions. What if they decide they want the morning after pill? These clinics have pushed the parents further away from their children and eroded more parental rights. And let's see here. This is from the UN. It's actually a video that goes into social emotional learning is the key to building global citizenship. If you are familiar or you get into the curriculum at all, you'll begin to see that term, global citizen, global citizen. They're building global citizens. So this is all about creating human capital for a workforce. When I attended that Counseling Association conference, the only vendors besides 2 were the workforce and social emotional learning. We don't need smart children. We need children we can control. They're going to be hired and fired based on their social credit score that they are collecting through all of this data. Georgia, you need to start looking for words, just red flags. Transformative, that's a huge red flag. Reimagine, global workforce. This is all about a global workforce. And this is straight off of CASEL's website. Developing special and emotional skills within equitable learning environments. Equitable, again, start looking for these words. Are particularly important now as we work to identify and elevate strong policies to address inequities in youth employment and engage in economics. Again, straight from CASEL, the Future Ready Student. American Rescue Plan is just one of hundreds of organizations that have put money into SEL. It is one of the biggest budget items. $123 billion they infused into K through 12. I would believe that was last year. Again, CASEL, you'll see this wheel everywhere. You will see this wheel on the CDC. You'll see it in China. This is a global plan. The whole child, whole community is what this is all about. This is about the whole child, surrounding your child. Think about school clinics. Those are private. They're public-private partnerships. They're about money. I can only imagine the amount of money that will be made on the pharmaceutical drugs that will be prescribed to our children. So the whole child, whole community is about making sure that every child is challenged, healthy, engaged, supported, and safe. Not defined by the parent, but as defined by the federal, state, and local government. It's all about principles, equity, partnerships, and quality. This came from a book that is on transforming the workforce for 0 to 8. You're going to hear more and more about early childhood education because they want to get our children as early as they can. SEL is in every daycare that is funded by any type of government, but it's also in a lot of our private daycares. But this is your child, the child in the center, and this is the parent and the family out here. This is every type of NGO or federal government organization that there is. And guys, we've been conditioned to accept that word stakeholder as just something normal. A stakeholder has an investment in what is going on and a benefit usually. So this is where we're headed. I think the only other thing that I would say is, as Maria was saying, I don't know how much of this can be changed, honestly, but we need to fight the battle. Our first opt-out is to remove your children from public school. It would take a generation or two, if possible, to even change these schools, and we are losing children every day. There are a lot of people who cannot remove their children, so we need to stand and fight for those kids. We need to mentor young moms. Us older women need to come around these moms and support them and encourage them. There are a lot of us, including Leisha, that is helping to go into churches and try to get them to open their doors to homeschoolers, to hybrid schools, to open up. Guys, I attended a 2-day symposium in Atlanta at a Christian school. It was for Christian headmasters from all over the country. Diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory, all the books, they all took it in and they wrapped it in scripture. It is very hard to find even a Christian school now that doesn't. When a school gets SEL, then it's going to start moving along. You're going to get the surveys, you're going to get the counselor. So every Christian school almost, with the exception of a few in our area, is just a glorified public school. Same with our private schools. So we need to be resourceful. We need to also, this is my opinion that I'd like to share if I can. It doesn't mean you would agree with me. But school choice is a trap for homeschoolers. School choice is being pushed by the UN. The UN says homeschooling is unsustainable. This has been in the works for a long time. This is about bringing all our schools under one umbrella. Well, what if we do that? Is the federal money going to stop? No, the federal money is not going to stop, and that's where all these issues are coming from. So nothing's going to change. But I will tell you the Arizona bill is the golden bill for school choice. Homeschoolers no longer apply as homeschoolers. They apply as education savings account students. Now they're blended into the public school. They're being tracked. They're going to have to teach to that test to maintain the voucher. And the other thing is they use the iWallet. Well, I would imagine Georgia has the iWallet. I'm sure others do too. That's where their marketplace is. That's where their funds come from. So again, they're being tracked. We believe in the end, that's where all their medical information is going to go, and that's where their digital ID is going to be. So one other thing, it's redistribution of wealth. That's not a conservative value. My property tax will not cover one voucher. So what if I have 5 or 6 children? It's going to come from all of us. What if someone wants to start a school that's against my faith? I'm going to be paying for that school. There's a lot behind this that I would hope and pray that people would do their own research. If you want more information, you can send me an email. I have more. But I think it's important that we always look at two sides of something and not just by the tagline, let the money follow the child. Because in all reality, it's going to the state first. When it comes to us, it's not our money. And there will be ties. So I just wanted to share that also. I hope that was okay, Leisha, because we talked about that. But I think that's everything. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Well, it's more of a comment.
Yes, sir.
You know, parents, more and more I'm hearing parents have no say what's going on with their kids in school, which is wrong. But if your child does something wrong, then the parent is held responsible. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the school shooting in Oakland County, I think it was last year, okay? Some 15-year-old boy went to school with a gun and shot all these students. Now the parents are being held responsible for that. But they probably had no say in how they were being educated. It makes no sense. You know, and another thing, all this stuff about sexuality in school. If I myself was sent an email to a minor with a link, let's say to a porn video, I would probably get prosecuted. You know, it makes no sense.
So if you think outside the box and outside our schools, what is this all doing? It's tearing down our country. And where is it starting? With the family. So if they blame the parents, then they're destroying that little family unit, right? And I'll tell you something else, they reward bad behavior. They don't reward good behavior. There's something called PBIS, oh gosh, I lost all of a sudden. PBIS, but Positive Behavior Intervention System. And that is about, again, SEL. My friend who's over curriculum, she's over curriculum for us, said, Rhonda, I can come in and beat you over the head with a water bottle 10 times, you will not get in trouble. But if you leave the room and you come back in and you apologize, you get rewarded. So PBIS also is about collecting data. I don't know about any of your schools, but we have schools with lanyards that have barcodes. You do something good, they scan it. You do something bad, they deduct it. What does that sound like? A social credit score. So, but behavior, again, is for a purpose. This is called the Hegelian dialectic. You guys should look that up if you don't know about it. It's creating friction for a certain outcome. And that's what they're doing. And it's really hard because it's hard to be a parent right now and it's hard to be a child right now. It's a very difficult time. But we are not hopeless. We have God, He's in control. He knows what's going on and there's a bigger picture than we can see. Yes, sir.
You mentioned some organizations. It seems like parents trying to fight back with this. It's like the only place to go after is maybe the school board, but this is being driven from much higher organizations. What would you say is the head of the snake here, or how many heads of snakes do you have?
I would say there's a lot of heads of snakes. But there is, I mean, if you do your own research, you'll find all of this is connected to the World Economic Forum, to Soros, to Gates, to Zuckerberg, to the United Nations. There's something called the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is helping them, this is the UN's goals. This is helping them attain their goals. And number 4 is education. So one is poverty, one is, you just go and you can pull those up. They're right there on the web. So everything is about helping them attain those goals. So it's very difficult. I think the one thing we would need to do is cut off the money, and we can't seem to get anyone to do that. We need to cut off the federal money and a lot of these grants. If you think about it, these are all non-governmental organizations, so many of them, that are involved in our school system. Because why? We're not a traditional school anymore. We're for profit. Our kids are a commodity. And we're seeing that.
but the only method of attacking we have is at the local level.
We are still local. That's the other concern about school choice, is the biggest funder of charter schools, and they are public-private partnerships, most of them, they're management organizations, is the Walton Foundation, who's involved in all of this. The Walton Foundation is big into the LGBTQ movement. They're big into healthcare. So what's going to happen if we end up pulling all our school under one umbrella and privatizing it? We're already public-private partnerships, right? So that if the Walton Foundation comes in like they do with Walmart and they undercut everybody, then we may have, as far-fetched as it may seem, it's really not. We may have a Walton Foundation running all our schools. And we will lose local control and it will move to regional. Those are great questions. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. You had a lot of really great information. And it's like, and I know I've said this to some of you, but I have always homeschooled. Even before I had children, God told me, you need to homeschool. At that time, I had no idea why. Now, I know exactly why He told me I need to homeschool, and I'm so thankful and I'm so grateful. So, I know that every parent is not going to be able to homeschool, and that's why you have online schools, that's why you have private charters, Christian schools that are classical education. So there's some great alternatives, and just really do research, and we're going to have some of that stuff on our website very soon. Please be patient. We are a brand new organization, and we have a wonderful person that's helping us with a website. She's actually going to be speaking in a little bit. But we will have a lot of resources, and we're going to collaborate with wonderful organizations like the Freedom Project Academy, as well as Truth in Education. So thank you. And thank you so much for our audiovisual and the use of this church. It is just such a blessing. And can we please a round of applause? And thank you so much for NTV Epic Times and live streaming so that everybody else can watch this. So we're so thankful. Thank you. So our next speaker is the Chief of Supreme Court and Appellate Practice at the Thomas More Law Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Aaron is an accomplished attorney who practices our nation's highest courts to protect our constitutional freedoms. Aaron has worked on some of the most challenging legal issues of our time, including protection for religious liberty, the sanctity of life, and the freedom of speech. Prior to focusing her practice on constitutional and appellate law, Aaron worked as a criminal prosecutor, zealously advocating for the rights of crime victims and for justice. She's the current chair of the Religious Liberty section of the State Bar of Michigan. Aaron has won the Defender of the Faith Award from Legatus and has appeared on several national television and radio programs. Her writing has been published in USA Today, Politico Magazine, National Right to Life News, and American Thinker. Please welcome Aaron Mercino.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me as a speaker. So the big question that I will be talking about is, do parents shed their rights at the schoolhouse door? Which it seems these days that people might be inclined to answer, it seems like they do. From their own personal experiences or anecdotal experiences of people that you know. But I think from a legal perspective, the answer is actually no. Parents don't shed their rights at the schoolhouse door. So to give you the complete answer to this, if we could go to the next slide, I want to start with just the very basics. What's the historical basis for parental rights? And I know this seems very obvious to many people probably in this audience, think with our ever-changing society, it is not as obvious to many as we might think that it is. So it all starts, I think, with nature. So clearly there's a biological element to being a parent. The child takes the genes from both the mother and the father. The child can't have come into existence without the mother and the father. And it's really amazing. Even the woman's body changes its functions to care for her child. So she will all of a sudden be able to create milk, to create food, to sustain the child's life. There's just this really amazing natural biological aspect of being a parent. So the biological parent-child relationship, it's truly a personal relationship in that it involves personal dependencies. This relationship is uniquely intimate in that it is a cause of the child's very existence and identity. The relationship is permanent and for the child literally identity defining. Just think if you had been conceived by a different mother or a different father, you would not be you here, sitting here today. Indeed, you may never have come into existence at all. There's really no other relationship that's as influential or defining in such a radical way as the parent-child relationship. And when a child is born, they are the most vulnerable, really perhaps even more vulnerable than they were pre-birth, because now they rely on the parents for everything. Every diaper, to be fed. Without their parents sustaining them or someone stepping into that parent role, they would not live another day. There's also the aspect of traits that are passed down, both physical traits and behavioral traits. And that's even true in adopted families, where families will, get each other's sense of humor. They'll, have different family traditions that they'll carry on through the generations. And that's because family plays a very vital role in society. The parent-child relationship plays such a vital role in society. Think of it as, Russian nesting dolls, where you have the doll at the very core is the parent and the child relationship. Beyond that, it's family, and then extended family, and then the church, and then the community, and then it goes beyond there, but all insulating that child to help that child grow, to help the child learn, to help meet the child's needs. So children belong first and foremost to their families and to their parents. And for so many, since time immemorial, really, our society, it's recognized that. And it's recognized that, just think, when a child is born, unless there's some extreme situation where there's been termination of parental rights in the past for someone who's giving birth to the child, it's just almost just automatic that on the birth certificate there'll be the mother and the father, and that the child will go home with the parents. It's just accepted that that's automatically the legal relationship. And this is something that's recognized biblically. So we, the children of God, are made in the image and likeness of God. And God, when he had Jesus born on earth, he selected parents for Jesus to be his earthly parents here on earth. God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And of course, one of those commandments is honor your father and your mother. It's throughout the Bible, Exodus, Matthew, the Proverbs. And it was not only honor your father and mother, but also it's a parent's responsibility, biblically, to raise your child. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. There's a dual responsibility, a responsibility on both sides. And that's recognized in our law. So parental rights centers around the parent's authority to make decisions about what is best for their child. It's frequently called what's the best interest of the child test in court. But it's not just a parent's right, really. It's also the child's right. It's the child's right to be taken care of by his or her parents, to be loved, to be cared for, to be sustained, to have all the child's needs met. Psychologically, just in every capacity, financially. It's also the child's right. So I think that sometimes people look at parental rights and they just think, oh, well, that's the interest of the parent. But no, it's really in the interest of the child and the parents. You see, horrible cases in the news. I know you're talking about the child who had a gun and killed all of these people at the high school. It's horrible. You see these examples of, perhaps a parent in a horrible, extreme situation, and that parent is acting atrociously and is neglectful or abusive. You don't see in the news the cases of what most frequently I'm sure you see in your communities, where you have a mom who's selfless, who gives her life to better her child, the dad who spends countless hours helping the child with homework, and the child does well, becomes a successful adult, and everyone, even though there was so much sacrifice involved, so much selflessness, so much focus on helping, the child above and beyond your own needs, at the end, it's wonderful, and there's a beautiful relationship, and there's a joy, even though the joy stems from sacrifice. You don't hear that on the news, but that is the parent-child relationship, and I think that's what we see also, in our own communities, in our own churches. And this is from the Western legal and philosophical tradition, and throughout most of, actually, civilizations worldwide, that the right of the parent is to direct the upbringing of the child, the education of the child. St. Thomas Aquinas, actually, defended this natural educational authority of parents against those who proposed to the child of Jewish parents, who, so a different faith than his own, ought to be baptized against their parents' will. So he recognized that baptizing a child against the Jewish parents' will was wrong. And he argued that according to the natural law, a son, before coming to the use of reason, is under the father's care. Hence, it would be contrary to natural justice if a child were to be taken away from its parents' custody or anything done to it against its parents' wishes. John Locke, who, of course, was so influential in the Declaration of Independence, which was written by Thomas Jefferson, but of course he borrowed a lot from John Locke, in his influential second treatise on government, emphasized that paternal authority derives from the natural duties parents have to nurture and educate their children. Locke believed that parental child-rearing authority is prior to and independent of political authority and should be respected by the government. So it's been the Western civilization and philosophical tradition throughout that the law would recognize this important parent-child relationship. We can go to the next slide. That's why in American law, this relationship has a history of being respected. So this American law respecting parental rights, it grew out of English common law, which is our whole American law system actually grew out of English common law. So it's the foundation for our American legal system. And parents under English common law were considered to have a natural duty to provide for the education of their children. And with our jurisprudence throughout the years, it's been recognized in both the 5th and 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And 14th Amendment. This is called the Substantive Due Process Clause. So the Substantive Due Process Clause is really the constitutional basis now in all of the case law for parental rights. And when parents go to court and they say, a school district has violated my constitutional right, their claim is most likely going to have been brought under the Substantive Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And that states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. The Substantive Due Process Clause was a huge focus in a recent case before the United States Supreme Court, the Dobbs versus Jackson Whole Women's Health case. I'm sure you've heard about it in the news. So in that case, the Supreme Court decided that there was no constitutional right to abortion stemming from the Substantive Due Process Clause. But after that decision came out, a more kind of covert holding of the court was that, and I'll quote it here, that the Constitution protects substantive due process rights that are deeply rooted. Some of those deeply rooted constitutional rights were then cited in Dobbs, and the court cited Washington versus Glucksberg, which is a case we'll talk about in a few minutes here, but that case specifically mentioned parental rights as being protected by the Substantive Due Process Clause. Now this is really important, and so after Dobbs was decided, legal scholars in this area of law were very excited, saying, oh my gosh, now look at, there's something we can hang our hat on, and the Supreme Court actually would decide that there is a substantive due process right to parental rights, and it deserves a heightened level of protection. And in the Wall Street Journal, there was even an article saying parental rights gets a huge boost. So if we can go back, if we can go to the next slide, to some of the early cases of the Substantive Due Process Clause, and talking about how the Supreme Court has protected parental rights through the years, and then how we got to an area where it wasn't as clear, and now where are we at? So the first case I want to talk about is from 1923, so about 100 years ago now, Mero versus Nebraska. So this is a case, the Supreme Court invalidated a Nebraska law banning the teaching of foreign languages to school children, finding that the law violated the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. The Mero law sprang from the nativist sentiment fostered during World War I. The court recognized a liberty interest in parents providing an education for their children, and found that the law infringed on that interest without a proper police power rationale. So Nebraska had no right to enact this law. In this case, Robert Meyer, he was a teacher at Zion Parochial School, he was charged with violating the state law by teaching German to a student. Nebraska had claimed that the law was a proper means to promote civic development by inhibiting training and educating immature foreign tongues and ideals before they could learn English and acquire American ideals. The court, while acknowledging the importance of ensuring that children attain proficiency in English, concluded in a majority opinion by Justice James McReynolds that the statute as applied is arbitrary without reasonable relation to any end within the competency of the state. He added that mere knowledge of the German language cannot reasonably be regarded as harmful. The court's reliance on the Due Process Clause in Meyer to invalidate state legislation was an extension of the reasoning in cases involving economic regulation that they had decided previously. The ruling in Meyer relied on popular line of cases, which is really interesting, and I guess we can talk privately about why that's interesting. I'm sure you don't want to hear. I'm sure everyone here doesn't want to hear that. But extended their logic well beyond the economic sphere. According to the court, the liberty protected by the Due Process Clause includes the right to acquire useful knowledge, to marry, establish a home, and to bring up children, to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience, and generally to enjoy those privileges long recognized at common law as essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men. The court soon recognized that the Due Process Clause protected against arbitrary state regulation. One of the most beautiful quotes, I think, from this case is, "It is the natural duty of the parent to give his children education suitable to their station in life." So this was a really influential case where the court said, no, we aren't going to have the state determine what's going to be taught to the kids. The parents are actually going to be in the proper position to determine that themselves. In Pierce versus Society of Sisters, this is a very famous case from 1925, the Supreme Court, their decision in the case, although it never directly mentions the First Amendment, it's become very important precedent, both for the rights of parents to educate their children and for the rights of parochial schools to operate alongside public schools. Pierce demonstrates how the court often has relied on property rights before it applies the First Amendment. Oregon had adopted, in this case, an initiative providing the Compulsory Education Act, which required most children to attend public schools through the age of 16 years old. The act had been challenged by the Society of Sisters and by the Hill Military Academy, both of which had previously provided such education on their own, and which now faced declining enrollments as a result of the law. The Supreme Court said unanimously that the requirement was unconstitutional. And it cited Meyer versus Nebraska and said that the sustaining principle was that parents could direct the upbringing and education of children under their control, and that the state had no power to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public school teachers. Here it was the compulsory law to be taught by public school teachers. And here is my favorite quote from that case. "The fundamental theory of liberty upon which all governments in this union repose excludes any general power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. The child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations." Now this brings us, fast forward about 50 years, to Wisconsin versus Yoder. And this is a really interesting case because it kind of melds parental rights and the First Amendment right to free exercise of religion. So the state of Wisconsin had enacted a compulsory education law requiring that students attend school through the age of 16. Amish families sought an exception from the law so they could stop sending their children to school at the age of 14 and to begin educating them at the home for skills that were necessary for the Amish way of life. The court ruled in favor of the parents. For the Amish, this law proved to be a significant burden on their ability to educate their children in line with their values and prepare them for adulthood in the Amish community. The parents in this case worried that the school environment could be harmful to their children by exposing them at an impressionable age to worldly values at odds with the Amish way of life. Further, it would be impossible for the parents to provide their children with the vocational training they considered essential if the children were engaged in full-time academic learning. As a result, the state's requirements, though generally reasonable, made it impossible for Amish parents to fulfill their religious obligation to prepare their children for the Amish way of life, as the Supreme Court recognized enforcement of the compulsory formal education requirement after the 8th grade would gravely endanger, if not destroy, the free exercise of the parents' religious beliefs. The court recognized in this case, yes, the state does have an interest in making sure that its citizens are educated, but the state's interests would not be significantly undermined by allowing the Amish to end their children's formal schooling at the age of 14, particularly given the Amish community's long history of producing law-abiding, peace-loving, and self-supporting citizens. Therefore, because the law conflicted with the Amish parents' right to free exercise of religion, and with their right to direct the education and upbringing of the children, and exempting the Amish was compatible with the compelling state interest at stake, the court correctly held that the Amish had a right to the exemption. And that was really the first time that the Supreme Court melded those two different really important legal doctrines, the substantive due process right that parents have, and parents' right to bring up their children in accordance with their faith. So understanding that parental authority is grounded on parents' serious personal obligation to care for their children also leads to a second related argument for parental rights that takes into account parental rights as conscience rights, or rights of free exercise of religion, such as those protected by the First Amendment. When the state makes it difficult or impossible for parents to fulfill their parental responsibilities in line with the dictates of their consciences, it violates their conscience rights, and in many cases, their free exercise rights, because many parents explicitly see their child-rearing obligations as also their religious obligations. And it's important to remember here that parents' obligations to educate their children are personal, and in some respects, non-transferable. This means that while, of course, parents can enlist the help of others, teachers, clergy, friends, family, the responsibility for their children's education is ultimately theirs. So the state cannot tell a parent, do not worry if what your child is learning in school contradicts the values you want to teach him, because now that your child has started school, we are in charge of his education, and we have experts who know how to do it better than you, so you are absolved of your obligation. That would be like telling a Catholic, do not worry if we pass a law that forbids you from going to church on Sunday, because we also have ensured that another more devout and prayerful person will go in your stead, so you are absolved of your obligation. It's just patently absurd. Because the obligation to attend Mass for a Catholic is a personal and non-transferable one. Obviously, there can be legitimate excuses for not fulfilling it, but you cannot fulfill it by having someone else do it for you. The same is true of a parental obligation to direct the education and upbringing of your child. As a result, policies that make it difficult or impossible for parents to fulfill their obligations are a serious violation of conscience rights, and often also explicitly of free exercise rights. For instance, when educational regulations require parents to allow their children to be exposed to certain ideas or a particular educational environment that they believe is potentially harmful or is harmful, they face a situation in which fulfilling their perceived parental obligations becomes nearly impossible. Either they must break the law and have the risk of having their child removed from their custody as a result, or other punishments, or they must knowingly place their child in harm's way. That Hobson's choice is untenable. If we can go to the next slide. I want to go through two additional Supreme Court cases because these kind of paved the way for it. This was kind of a really strong, from 1923 to 2000 was a really strong era for parental rights in the courts. So two cases, the facts of the cases are not necessarily on point, but the holdings in the case are extremely important and applicable. So Parham versus J.R., the Supreme Court held that a parent or a guardian can commit a minor to a mental institution if a staff physician certifies that the minor should be committed, even if the minor strenuously opposes their decision. put this in a different context, say just an ordinary healthcare context. A parent brings in a child who needs a tetanus shot, they stepped on a nail or something like that. The parent wants the child to have the shot. The child's objecting, is afraid of needles, etc. One independent physician who's also in the hospital believes, yes, the child should, in the interest of their health, have the shot. It's the same sort of reasoning here, that the parent has the control even if the minor is strenuously objecting, so long here as it is right for the child to be going through this, and there's support that, yes, the child has a mental health problem, or the child, has a health issue that needs to be tended to. But in the ruling and the holding of the case, there's very important language, and I'd like to read that to you now. The law's concept of the family rests on a presumption that parents possess what a child lacks in maturity, experience, and capacity for judgment, requiring for making life's difficult decisions. More important, historically, it is recognized that natural bonds of affection lead parents to act in the best interests of their child. The status notion that governmental power should supersede parental authority in all cases because some parents abuse and neglect children is repugnant to American tradition. Simply because the decision of a parent is not agreeable to a child, or because it involves risks, does not automatically transfer the power to make that decision from the parents to some agency or officer in the state. The next case I want to talk about, Washington versus Bloxburg. This is the case that was cited in the Dobbs opinion. The reason why it's important is not because it had to do with parental rights, but because of what it said about parental rights. So the case was actually, it's a landmark decision by the Supreme Court, which unanimously held that a right to assisted suicide in the United States was not protected by the Due Process Clause. But I want to read this quote to you. In a long line of cases, we have held that in addition to the specific freedoms protected by the Bill of Rights, the liberty specially protected by the Due Process Clause includes the rights to direct the education and upbringing of one's children. So it specifically upheld parental rights. The 14th Amendment forbids the government to infringe fundamental liberty interests of all, no matter what process is provided, unless the infringement is narrowly tailored to serve a compelling state interest. Now that language is very important. Narrowly tailored to serve a compelling state interest. I'm sure it sounds like legalese, but what this is, it's called strict scrutiny. And someone once wrote about strict scrutiny that it's strict in scrutiny, fatal in fact. So it's very, very difficult for the state to pass this test. So if the state passes a law that infringes upon a parent's rights under the Substantive Due Process Clause, then they have to get past that extremely high hurdle of strict scrutiny. So this was a very important case. And then came, if we can go to the next slide, a case called Troxel versus Granville. And it actually had to do with grandparents' rights. It's a pretty interesting case where the state of Washington passed a third-party visitation statute. So someone could go into court and say, I want to spend time with your child. Here it was the grandparents of the mother, and the father had committed suicide, but she had remarried and they were trying to build their life, and so she challenged this law for being unconstitutional. In the end, because what the Washington law did was it kind of made third-party visitation rights infringe upon parents' rights to this extent that it was unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court found that it was. The holding of the Supreme Court was really muddled, and it made it difficult to tell which standard should apply when looking at a parental rights case. So prior to the year 2000, prior to Troxel versus Granville, the Supreme Court followed the doctrine that parents have a fundamental right to direct the upbringing and education of their children. Parents were assumed to be the best caretakers for their children unless proven unfit, and our nation consistently maintained that parents possess a fundamental right to raise their children as they see fit. And then post-Troxel, post-2000, no clear precedent. So rather than continuing and upholding the parental rights doctrine that had been in place since 1923 and clearly established in these previous cases, the Supreme Court, in its split decision in Troxel versus Granville, opened the door for individual judges and for states to kind of apply their own rules, their own standards for parental rights claims. And this is kind of where we were from 2000 until, if you can go to the next slide, COVID. And what happened during COVID, parents were actually home with their kids, sometimes for the first time in this generation of parents, actually. They were home, sitting next to their kids, watching the virtual schooling of their children, and their eyes were opened. And they were pretty surprised by the most common complaints that we received for case intakes. If we can go to the next slide. This is the trend, actually. So I think people are very much more concerned with parental rights now than they were pre-2020. Now, if we can go to the next slide. The two most common complaints that we get, the ideological matter that's being taught in schools conflicts with the parents' worldview and or their religious faith. And the second, that the schools are withholding information from parents. And both of these are very problematic. And I wanted, the last slide, I just want to talk about 3 cases that are very recent. And the last one is actually a huge victory in parental rights. So Digliola versus the School Board of the City of Harrisonburg, this is a case out of Virginia State Court. And in that case, the parents challenged a school policy requiring teachers to socially transition students without parents' consent by deceiving the parents about their new name and the pronouns that the children would use at school, unless the child gave permission to the school officials to disclose that information from the parents. And that's a case that's pending still in the state court in Virginia. The next case, Deandra versus Becerra. In that case, the Biden administration is trying to force publicly funded health centers to put contraceptive pills into the hands of minors without parental consent. So that's the way that the Biden administration is interpreting Title X, and it's pretty astounding that this is clearly, medical care, something that is within the bailiwick of parents to be able to decide, but their policy is that it should be done without parents' consent. This is, I thought, an interesting quote from one of the legal scholars working on this. Recent experiences taught that the fundamental rights of parents to direct the upbringing of their children is under siege in schools and across the country. Those threats sometimes extend even outside of the school context. Unfortunately, outdated dicta in some of the court's cases could be construed by lower courts and officials as offering parents little to no protection against new challenges they and their children are facing today. And this person believes that the Fifth Circuit, who's currently going to decide this case, should affirm that parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children, that all government intrusions on that right are subject to strict scrutiny, that a parent's right to choose whether to consent to non-essential medical treatment for their children falls within the scope of that fundamental right, and that the intrusion on that right challenged here fails strict scrutiny. And on that basis, the Fifth Circuit should affirm the parents' rights. And I believe that analysis is correct. The last case, and I want to end with this because this is so hopeful. So after that period of time, after 2000, after the Troxville case, there were a lot of cases that decided not in favor of parental rights. But I think that there's really a resurgence, and this doctrine is making a comeback. And I think that this case, TF versus Kettle Marine School District, is proof positive of that. This is a case that's out of Wisconsin, and it's been on the news. You may have seen it. The parents challenged a Wisconsin school policy that requires staff to encourage students to transition to a different gender identity without parental consent, and even over a parent's objection. In that case, school officials told the plaintiff parents that they plan to begin socially transitioning their then 12-year-old daughter to a male gender identity, despite the parents' explicit instruction that school officials were to use her legal name and female pronouns. The girl had been suffering from anxiety and depression. After her parents withdrew her from school, her demeanor improved, and she changed her mind about wanting to transition to a male identity, telling her mom that the affirmative care she had received, in quotes, affirmative care, she had received from the school counselor had really messed her up. So the court ruled in favor of the family, and in its holding said this: this court has before it what modern society deems a controversial issue, transgenderism involving minors within our schools. Clearly, the law on this issue is still developing across the country and remaining largely unsettled. However, this particular case is not about the broad controversial issue. This particular case is simply whether a school district can supplant a parent's right to control the healthcare and medical decisions for their children. This case is not about parents controlling how a school specifically educates its students. This is also not a case about the broader societal debate or implications of transgenderism in our youth or the political movement that supports it. The well-established case law in that regard, Kettle Marine cannot supplant the rights of the parents. The school district abrogated the parental rights, and it lists the parents, when the district decided to socially affirm the child's new gender identity despite the parents' objection. Through its policy of disregarding parental wishes on a medical or health-related decision, and with how fast questionings one gender can arise, and it puts the child at risk of being harmed by the current school district policy. The current policy of handling these issues on a case-by-case basis without either notifying the parents or by disregarding the parents' wishes is not permissible and violates fundamental parental rights. And the court decided in the parents' favor. So my conclusion, the question that we first asked, do parents shed their rights at the schoolhouse door? I believe that they do not. They do shed some of their rights, yes, but even so, parents have a fundamental right to direct the education and upbringing of their children. And unless a school or the state has a compelling reason for not doing so, it must respect the rights of the parents to raise their children as they see best. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll accept questions, I think, because we're running over, just privately in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Wow. So you as parents, you as grandparents, you as concerned citizens just heard that you actually do have some rights. They've been trying to tell us that we have no parental rights. And I think that more and more stuff will be coming out, hopefully with the Supreme Court cases. And I actually heard, I was at a summit in San Diego a couple months ago, and David Barton spoke, and he actually said that because of the Supreme Court decisions recently, there are many more parental rights. And also, we'll have those on the website at some point, but there are many things that people don't know that you can now do in public schools. So our last speaker, she is a very good friend of mine, and she is going to speak briefly about homeschooling. And then after, I will close us and I'll say a few words. But Sheila Cahun is a wonderful friend of mine. She is helping us with our website, and she's a homeschooling warrior mom, and she stepped up to the plate, and I am just so thankful for her for willing to speak to us about homeschooling. And so, welcome, Sheila Cahun.
You can on my keyboard and it'll go through. Thanks.
She probably needs the microphone.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to make this quick. I know it's been a long day, and I just first want to thank Metro Church of Christ for always being an amazing place to come to when we are discussing freedom and God, and it's just amazing that you get to always open up your church to us. Thank you so much. And secondly, applause for Alicia for putting this together. She's a warrior for just the freedom and liberty of our kids and for all of us, quite honestly. What I'm sharing here is an old schoolhouse. Remember that? One schoolhouse for the kids to learn in. So why did we get into the public schools? Well, if you don't know, and you can research this, public schools are really to factor your children. It's to become really a place where every kid gets produced the same way. And so they can get out into the world and be little, basically factory rats, right? Producing things out in the world. So go to the next slide. So who am I? I am Sheila Cahun. I'm not really anybody special. Just like the first speaker, I'm just a mom who really took it upon herself when her son was born, because he was born with a medical condition, to just raise awareness. And God leads us, God gives us things to get out into the world and do things. And he did, not that he gave my son the medical condition, but because of it, I became a warrior for that. Now I'm a warrior for homeschooling and just an activist for freedom, liberty, and sovereignty, personal sovereignty. So I've homeschooled for 4 years. Please hit enter. I run a real estate business, so anybody that tells you you can't homeschool and run a business is a liar. Go on. I have been married for 18 years to my wonderful husband, who puts up with all my stuff. And go on to the next one. And I have only one child. And yes, it is easier to homeschool one child, but I will tell you, you are actually that child's friend. You're the teacher, you're the mom, you're the everything. So it is, I would say, a little bit tougher because you are that everything to that child. And then go on to the next one. And I am also a volunteer. I volunteer in almost every area that I can because we need it. And I am a school board member for the Mount Clemens Public Schools. And yes, I am a homeschool mom. I do not send my child to the public schools, but I felt it vitally important to get involved in the public school system. And so I stepped up and I ran for Mount Clemens, and quite honestly, I didn't put much effort into it. I really relied on God, and I said, you know what, God, if you want me there, you're going to put me there. And I was elected. I was the last one to be elected above other people that were already on the board. So that speaks a lot. Go on to the next one. So, what do I need to do first? Go on to the next slide. You have to stop saying I can't. Anybody can homeschool. I'm sorry, but everybody can. You can do it. It's just a priority. And you have to think about it that way. What is my priority? And so the first thing that you need to do is to change your mindset. The second thing is to master step 1. Because you have got to, it's the thing that I learned when I first started homeschooling. I failed my child a year and a half while I was homeschooling him in my head. Then we went to an event where he was there with high school kids. It was actually a cash flow 101 class, and we were there with other kids, public school kids, and mostly high school kids. And the teacher of that cash flow 101 class was talking about, hey, who invented this and who did this? My son rattled off answers to nearly every question. It was at that moment that I had the confidence, and I said, I'm not failing him. He's learning exactly what he needs and when he exactly needs it. And I knew then that I was doing the right thing. So it is a mindset shift. You need to realize that you can do this. You will not fail your kids. And why will you not fail your kids? our kids' first teacher is us. We teach our kids everything they need to know in the beginning of their lives. Stop thinking you can't do it, or you will, or that you will fail them, because you won't. Go on to the next slide. We taught them how to walk. Go ahead. We taught them how to talk. We taught them how to play. We taught them how to eat. And what else did we teach them? I was thinking, we taught them how to go potty. And honestly, if we can teach them how to go potty, that is such a hard thing that we can teach them anything. I thought that I would fail my child because I didn't know certain curriculums. But you know what? You know what I found out? I found out that I was learning right along with him on certain things that I didn't know. So, you are qualified. I don't care what anybody says. You have it in you to homeschool your child, because you know what? God gave you that child. That child is your responsibility, and He's giving you, He's confident in you that you will do the right thing by Him. Okay? And we have to all know that we have the greater one on the inside of us, so we can do anything. Okay? Go ahead. So, I'm just going to run through some Department of Education things. So this is a compiled law. This addresses the homeschool. Go ahead. And so the law requires that a parent or legal guardian of a child from the age of 6 to 16, it has been extended to, I think, 18, during the entire school year, except under certain limited circumstances. The exceptions include, but are not limited to, sending the child to a state-approved non-public school or educating the child at home in an organized educational program. What that's basically saying is that other people cannot homeschool your child. You have to basically do it. Okay, go ahead. Homeschool education is the responsibility of the parent or the legal guardian. The parent assigns the homework, gives tests, and grades these tests. And the issuance of report cards, transcripts, and diplomas are the responsibility of the homeschool family based on internal standards. And if the homeschooling continues to grade 12, the parent issues a school diploma. This right there was an aha moment for me. Because I thought, if I could give my son the diploma, what are we doing with our kids in the public school? We have to force them to go to public school to get a diploma when we, in fact, can give it to them. It was a shocking revelation for me, and I thank God every day for that. The annual reporting of a homeschool to the Michigan Department of Education is voluntary. Yay for that. If you don't know already, Michigan has the most lenient homeschooling laws in the country, and I'm glad they do, quite honestly, for my sake. Not that I'm lenient with my son, I'm not. But I think that for homeschooling families that are looking into it, it's a good thing for them so that they can navigate slowly into the process of homeschooling. Go ahead. It is not required unless a student is requesting eligible special education services. So basically, if your child needs special education services, you have got to register with the state of Michigan so that you can get those services for your child. I would tell you my child has special needs, and he had an IP and all kinds of stuff at public school. We don't need it. We don't need it after he gets out and is at the home, because we can school exactly like we want to. We don't need to follow a public school form of learning. And so if he doesn't, if he wants to take a break after 30 minutes or 20 minutes, he can. And if he wants to get up and walk around while he's learning, he can. It's not public schooling at home. Go ahead. It is not required that a parent inform the local school of the decision to homeschool, however, it is suggested. I almost took that "it is suggested" out because it's ridiculous. You don't have to tell the public school that you are homeschooling. You don't have to tell them where you're taking or sending your child or anything. If you decided to unenroll your child and you wanted to send them to another school, you don't need to tell them that. Okay? Go ahead. If you are currently enrolled in the public school right now, you just need to write a letter to the school principal and drop it off to them. Now, why am I telling you to drop it off to them? Because in this information from the Michigan Education, it says you can, I think it says call them or drop it off. I'm telling you to drop it off so that there's proof you handed it to somebody and they can't come back at you and say that you didn't give or you didn't notify or anything like that. You hand it to a person in the office, they have no choice but to accept that letter. Go ahead. And then you know who you gave it to and why, so they cannot say they didn't get your letter. Go on to the next one. So what to put in the letter. So the name of your child or of your children, the fact that you are unenrolling them in the public school, and the date that you unenrolled them. Go ahead. And then you do not need to let them know where they're going or what curriculum that you're teaching them. They don't need to know anything. Go ahead. It's none of their business. You do not need to complete any other form that they have. And I say this because constantly in our groups, we are getting messages that say, well, they gave me a form to fill out. Oh, I have this form to fill out. You don't have to fill out any form. All you got to do, write them the letter, walk out the door with your child, and never look back. Okay? And then document everything, because that way, if anybody does try to cause ruckus, then you have documentation of everything that you did, if they can't come after you. Because there could be issues with truancy if you don't do stuff, and I think that's on the next slide. So failure to withdraw, you can be reported for truancy. And so this is the thing that I don't want you to deal with, so write the letter. Teacher requirement, you don't have to have a certificate or any type of formal education to homeschool your child. Yeah, that's basically it. Go ahead. And then the course of study is all of that, mathematics, reading, English, and the funny part is the next part. The Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of Michigan, is a requirement by the Michigan Department of Education. How crazy is that? Okay? So go on to the next one. And then the history of present form of civil government of the United States and the state of Michigan. When I saw this, I said, that's crazy. Like, such humor. You know, God has such humor, right? So go ahead. And then the political subdivisions and municipalities of the state of Michigan in grades 10 through 12. Now, I will say, I wasn't a history buff or anything when I was in school. I hated history. I thought it was boring and dull. I wish I would have paid more attention. I wish I would have been more involved. And I wish the teacher would have made it more exciting, because you know what? I'm behind the 8 ball and I'm learning quick, but it's hard. So we're, in our groups, we're teaching our kids this information. So go ahead. And then the electives, homeschooled students may enroll in non-essential elective classes at the residence public school, subject to the district enrollment policy. I don't take part in any of this. My son's in enough stuff, so I don't have to worry about it.
You're saying they can take those classes along with homeschooling?
Yes.
At a public school?
Yes, as long as the school is allowing it. Okay? Homeschool families are responsible for per diem. We're responsible for everything. And go ahead. And we don't get any money for it. So we are responsible for all the textbooks, workbooks, curriculum, everything. And then the student records, parents are encouraged to maintain them. I will say, if your child plans to go to a university, if you want to keep transcripts, keep them. You don't have to, unless your child's going to be going into a university after, I believe it's either 9th or 10th grade. And then you should really be keeping those transcripts because they have to transfer. Go ahead. There are no required tests for the homeschool kids. The parent is responsible for administering any tests based upon the curriculum they use. And they're not required, but homeschool students may participate in state testing. I'll tell you right now, when my son was in public school, which he was from the age of, from kindergarten to 5th grade, And I yanked him. I wrote a letter and I said, no more standardized testing for my child. It doesn't do anything for him. You don't make any changes for his curriculum based on his standardized test results, so he's not going to take them. And then later when oh, and by the way, all this presentation has no relevance to my state board standing. My state board, my school board member, this is irrelevant to this, okay? So this whole presentation is irrelevant to that. I missed that earlier. But I realized when I walked through the school with the superintendent, she told me, because I said, well, you know, parents should just be pulling the, you know, writing letters and saying, I'm going to opt my kid out of state testing. And little did I know that if enough parents do that, the school loses funding. Aw. I think there is an avenue for a way to really, you know, get the funding out of the schools. Along with homeschooling, pulling your children, which is money going out of the school, get the parents to learn about how they can opt their kids out from the testing. And the school loses funding. So what happens after that, we have to really kind of consider those things. But something needs to change. So go ahead. The work permits, homeschool students may obtain a work permit through their local public schools, and there are no public funds available for homeschooling. And then just like with high school right now, and I don't know if it's every district, but you can have dual enrollment, like homeschoolers can go to college while they're being homeschooled. Go ahead. And then there's other info from the Macomb Department of Education. Go on to the next one. Homeschool when you can at home. So what are some options? Homeschool when you can at home. Homeschool is not public school at home. You determine how it looks. You can co-op. You can. There's Homeschool Connections, which is in different cities in the Macomb and Oakland area. And then you can do some online versions like Khan Academy or IXL. Go ahead. Homeschool Connections, there's their website. Continue on. Faith Joy is another good option. We do Homeschool Connections. It's been a great option for us the last 3 years. Continue. Homeschool. So these are some homeschool Facebook groups if anybody wants to look into them. Homeschool in Michigan has 14,000 members. And then Michigan Christian Homeschoolers. And then another group is HSLDA, which is actually the legal group for homeschoolers in Michigan. Go ahead. I only have a few more slides. So this is our co-op group. This is them learning the Constitution. So we are going through curriculum right now that is Constitution learning. And we have kids from 8 to 15 in our learning session. And the one thing that struck me about this photo, actually struck me about the vision when I took this photo, every single child was sitting in that room, quietly. It was quiet in there. Nobody was up, nobody was running around, nobody was yelling and screaming. They were all sitting there engaged in learning, raising their hand, wanting to read. This is how school can be for kids. Go ahead. This is us doing a field trip to the zoo, and we were also doing volunteer work for the Forgotten Harvest at the church where we homeschool, where we do our co-op. Go ahead. This is us doing our electives. We did life skills, and so we did preserving. And then we dissected frogs a couple weeks ago. So there's some electives we did for our homeschooling co-op. And any questions? Yeah?
Yeah, I once heard that there was some kind of network between parents who homeschool, and that, like, let's say one parent was more adept at history, another was more adept at geography, one at science, and the kids would travel between the houses. Is that really going on?
So I've heard people do that. We don't do that. What we do, and so his question was parents going from different places and schooling kids based on certain curriculum that they may be more educated about. We don't do that. I know there have been parents that I've heard that have done that, but what we do is in our co-op, we have, I think there's 5 or 6 parents, and if one has to leave, we're all teaching. Like, we're all there teaching. We take turns each week going through the curriculum, but basically it's all of us there taking care of the kids, making sure that they're learning, making sure they're engaged, and then going home and doing the follow-up that we need to do there. Yeah.
Just another question. Is there, like, for homeschool children, an opportunity for them to get like phys ed gym class or to get involved in sports?
Yeah, through the elective, through the public school, but I mean, Homeschool Connections, they've had classes where it's been gym, it's been strategy and logic through games. Like, there's so many options. The sky is actually the limit. I mean, there are so many options that you can do once you pull your child from the public school, because you're not public schooling at home, you're actually trying to engage your child, you're trying to get them to learn something. And so you begin to think about learning in a different light. It's not just sitting at a desk learning something, it's getting up, it's going and finding things, it's getting them engaged in thinking and critical thinking. So, okay? I just have a couple other things. So, the one thing that, I just had a few notes. The one thing that people fail to do right now is think about what these groups that keep pushing all this stuff are doing to us. They are basically keeping all of us on the rat wheel, right? By, oh, there's a new iPhone, oh, there's a new computer. We have to get financially set in our lives so that we only worry about our needs and not what our wants are. Our wants are our children. That's the most important thing. We have to get financially set. And then where to co-op is churches and homes, and then the same people that are pushing the CASEL or whatever that curriculum is, those are private businesses. What are the private businesses doing in our public school?
Right.
They're pushing that stuff and they're private businesses. When are we going to stop the private businesses from coming into our schools?
And politics.
Exactly. And that's all I have. And you had a question, just one last question.
I find a co-op, if you wanted to, seems like co-op is a joint way with others to homeschool. So is there a way to find one in your neighborhood, or? Yeah, actually, the groups that I shared, if you go to those, there are groups. We actually had a co-op a couple years ago that we joined, and we only did it for one class. And then we joined the following year, and it ended up not working out. We didn't really kind of align with their thoughts. So then we actually created our own co-op, and now we have an amazing 18 kids in our co-op, and we have, I think it was like 6 or 7 parents, I forget, but we have it, and we're doing it, and we're thriving, and I'm telling you, the kids are so sad when they have it. My son missed last week because he was sick, and they're so sad that they miss it because they get together and they enjoy schooling. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. So, bottom line is you can homeschool. Anybody can homeschool. You can homeschool if you are a working parent. You can homeschool if you have one child. You can homeschool if you have 10 children. In fact, I have many friends who have 9+ children that homeschool all of their children. Can you imagine? I have 4, and I feel very blessed. And it is, there's never a dull moment, but homeschooling is definitely an option. You have online school, so there are lots of options that you can look at. So I want to thank all of the wonderful speakers with all of the wonderful information that they've shared today. This is so important for any parent, any grandparent, any concerned citizen. Everybody needs to know this information. So please, if you're online, please share this. as well as visit our website, libertyleadersunite.org. We will have many initiatives coming, and we are just so blessed. So can I just say, just close in prayer. Dear Lord, I just thank you for everything that you have given us. I just thank you and praise you for all of the information that you've given each one of these speakers, and just allow people to hear this and allow people to utilize this in their lives, and just give them the courage to stand up and do something for those children that need it so much. So I just thank you and praise you, and we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good job.
We are going to have workshops. So if, I know, it's like, hello, but we're going to have workshops. So we're going to have 2 different workshops. The first workshop is going to be where you can actually get a report card of your school district to see how it compares to other school districts, and the other one will be a workshop about homeschooling. So if you would like to stay, we'd love to have you. I understand it's been a very long day, and we just would love to have you join us in any capacity that you can. So thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Very informative. Yeah, thanks.